The celebration was a roaring wave of sound and silk, the great hall loud and desperately packed. I sat beside my husband at the main banquet table, positioned as his primary wife. The two secondary wives were seated respectfully yet noticeably behind us. Our station, and that of my husband, was undeniably high and elevated. As the Prime Minister of the realm, there was only one man who stood above Rickard, the king himself. I brought the gilded cup to my lips and took a sip of the deep red wine. The taste was exceptionally smooth and rich, a premium vintage that warmed the tongue. The king, Silas, had personally commanded it to be served to me. He caught my eye as I drank, lifting his heavy golden goblet in a silent salute. A slow, chilling smirk played on his lips, a gesture I understood all too well. It meant that his attentions would be on me once the tedious celebration concluded. I let my hand drift to my stomach, a fleeting protective gesture. The tiny mound of a bump was not yet visible beneath the fine fabric of my gown. I knew that once Rickard discovered I was pregnant again, he would inevitably force me to get rid of it. He had done so for the past 15 years, swearing he would never be saddled with the king's bastard. I held a bitter hatred for them both, especially since Rickard had freely given me to King Silas in the first place, all to advance his own grasping career. Silas's focused attentions on me were no secret at court. I was simply known, with a sneer or a sigh, as the king's favourite whore. His legitimate wives stared daggers at me from across the hall, their disdain palpable. Among them was my own sister, Astoria. She had once held the respected position of Silas's principal wife, but was downgraded to a secondary one after the ambitious Gemma family forged a powerful alliance with Silas. The most disturbing irony in this tapestry of betrayal was that Gemma had been married to Silas's brother Ilias, the very man whose downfall this entire blood-soaked celebration was meant to honour. Silas suddenly rose from his throne and clapped his hands once, a sound that cut through the clamour and instantly drew all eyes in the room. "Friends," his voice boomed, carrying a false joy, "we are gathered here tonight to celebrate a long-awaited victory over the pretender Ilias. May his body burn in the eternal hells." A loud, almost frenzied applause erupted, an exuberant thunder that shook the very rafters. A wave of nausea crested, forcing me to take low, shallow breaths. I lifted my cup of water, sipping carefully. Yet, even in my sickness, a defiant thought made me want to scoff at Silas's words. There were many pretenders in this room, and he was the biggest of them all. He might hurl insults at his dead brother, but the only title that truly belonged to Silas was usurper. The entire court knew it, yet they had all accepted it. Many, in fact, had actively helped him. "Ladies and gentlemen, my loyal subjects," Silas continued, his voice dripping with mockery, "I present to you the fallen great warrior himself, Ilias." The callous jest sparked another round of coarse laughter across the hall. I quickly scanned the faces around me. A handful of people did not laugh. Their presence here was an act of cold obligation and raw cowardice, a sentiment I understood and commiserated with deeply. The court band began to play a loud, annoying tune, drawing all attention toward the main double doors. A troupe of dancers and jesters pranced in, and between them, held aloft on a long golden spike, was a head. The vivid purple eyes and thick, inky black hair made its identity sickeningly obvious. Laughter and vile jeers swept through the hall. My disgust rose, hot and suffocating. This was no victory. It was a barbaric execution. Luring a man with the false promise of his son, held captive for a decade, only to then decapitate him was the action of a craven. But then again, this ruthless deceit was likely the only way they could have ever captured the man once known as the Dark Prince. I pushed myself up from my cushioned seat, the movement stiff and desperate, and headed for the small powder room. There I leaned over the porcelain basin and released the bitter contents of my stomach. The elaborate jewelled dress I was wearing felt suddenly too tight, too heavy. I felt the sweat prickling on my skin as if I were weeping from every pore. I cleaned myself up as best I could, taking a long, steadying moment before summoning a nearby footman. I asked him to prepare my private carriage and discreetly inform me the moment it was ready. Returning to the banquet, I found Rickard's face practically jubilant. He was proudly basking in the glory of the act, for it was he who had had the honour of swinging the sword that decapitated the Dark Prince. When I reached my seat, his fingers clamped around my arm, his grip immediately painful. He leaned in, his voice a low, vicious hiss. "Don't embarrass me. Where did you run off to, you whore?" I flinched at the sharpness of his words and the brutal pressure on my arm. His eyes dropped to where his hand rested, and he instantly released me. He remembered then how much the king favoured my body to be bruiseless, knowing my pale skin easily showed any rough handling. "I am not well, Ricard." "Forgive me," I murmured, my tone placating. It was a skill I had mastered over the years. In this world, to be a woman without a strong family backing or personal wealth was a profound and constant vulnerability. "You had better stop your nonsense," he whispered harshly. "Tonight is a big celebration and you know what that means." Mara, the secondary wife seated nearby, snorted audibly. It was the transaction. He whores me out to the king tonight for another rung on the ladder of power. The grotesque head was now hung somewhere near the dais where Silas sat, and the dancers dispersed. I spotted the footman I'd spoken to earlier. Before he could approach, I rose again. "Is it ready?" My voice was barely a breathless whisper, fully aware that what I was about to do would have catastrophic consequences. He gave a small, quick nod and immediately led me out a side exit. I climbed into the carriage and sat back, a wave of desperate relief washing over me. Once we reached our silent house, I immediately stripped off my confining clothes and lowered myself into a tub of cold water, seeking to cool both my body and my surging anxiety. I can't do this anymore. A desperate promise I made to myself every single night. In the quiet, cold sanctuary of the bath, the house still, I drifted off to an exhausted sleep. I was awakened abruptly by a hand stroking my nipple. I sat bolt upright. It was still dark outside and the oil lamps in the room were burning low. Ricard's face was half covered in shadow, making him appear both familiar and utterly alien. "Such beauty," he murmured, his voice deceptively low and smooth. "I was once the envy of all my peers when I married you." His hand moved slowly to my face. I froze, my eyes wide and fixed on his. "Why did you leave tonight?" he finally asked. I shook my head, repeating the lie. "I'm not feeling well, Ricard." His hand migrated from my face, down my body, and landed on my stomach. "You are increasing, carrying another bastard." He had forced me to lose 7 children. I hadn't been pregnant in close to 5 years, and the surprising resilience of my body after so many abortions felt like a perverse miracle. "He wanted you tonight. You know how much the king loves his favourite whore. He was in a sour mood when we couldn't find you. I even offered him both Mara and Elora, but he only wants you." "Ricard." His hand moved gently, almost lovingly, to my neck, not yet applying any pressure. "You've let me down tonight." I knew the sequence of events that came next. It was always a brutal beating that would confine me to my room for at least a month. "Ricard, please," I pleaded, a familiar, useless plea. His eyes seemed to go crazy, the shadows in them deepening. "Did you even ever love me, Aspen?" he sneered, and his hand clamped my throat tight. I began to flail violently in the tub. He shoved my head down, submerging me completely underwater. I had loved him once, in the beginning, but that love had been utterly extinguished the moment he forced me to sleep with the prince, begging me to do it just once for the sake of his career. He swore the only way he could protect his family was by achieving a higher position. He had even tried to soften the blow by revealing I was the one the prince had originally wished to marry, but he'd been lured into marrying my sister Astoria instead. I went to Silas, desperately hoping my family would be spared from the political fallout. And yet, they were not. My father was soon deemed a corrupt traitor, having played his hand too greedily. Those who once carried favour with him could no longer bear his sight. My own hand shot up to his, scrabbling to loosen the iron grip he had on my neck. He then slammed my head onto the porcelain lip of the tub. A dizzying wave of pain hit and I felt my orientation shatter. He hit me once more and then shoved me under the water again, holding me down with terrible force. I looked up at him through the surface, fighting with what little strength I had left, but I knew this was my end. I watched as blood began to swirl around me, a pink cloud blooming in the cold bathwater. My blood. The fragments of conscious thought were slipping away. Water entered my mouth. I coughed, and more water rushed in, burning its way to my lungs. Slowly, inevitably, everything began to drift into nothingness. The cruel, dark image of my husband faded away entirely, replaced by the deep, silent darkness. Chapter 2. The Familiar Terror. I shot up from the water, taking a great, gasping breath. My entire body was trembling violently. I scanned the immediate surroundings, the small enclosed space of the bathroom, but there was no sign of Ricard. The water I sat in was simply milky white, and still with no terrifying traces of blood. Was it a dream? I looked out the small window. The sky was still a pale, late afternoon gold and blue outside. I must have simply fallen asleep in the bath. Ricard hadn't killed me. Yet a deep, unsettling feeling persisted. Something was profoundly wrong. The bathroom itself looked different, smaller somehow, and the water I was sitting in was warm, not the shocking cold temperature I remembered plunging into. A wave of dizzying recognition hit me. I knew this room, this layout, but it was impossible. This house had burned down years ago. A soft, familiar knock sounded, and the door opened. My eyes flew to the woman standing there. Katie, my personal maid. Her face was unblemished and smooth, her cheeks full, her entire appearance years younger. "It won't do you any good to go to the ball looking like a prune, my lady," she said, a familiar, playful click of her tongue. She held out a thick towel, waiting for me to exit the tub. Well, confused and unsteady, I stood and gingerly stepped out. "Katie, what's happening?" I asked, my voice thin. She looked at me perplexed. "What do you mean, my lady?" she replied, helping to wrap one towel securely around me while using another to gently dry my long, dark, thick hair. "Where are we?" I pressed. Katie moved around to face me, an indulgent confusion clouding her brow. "Why, we are at Baron Stannis's residence, your father's house," she said, as if stating the obvious. She then wrinkled her nose slightly. "Have you been sneaking wine? You know your father and mother will not be pleased," she spoke with a loving chide. I reached for the back of my head. It felt completely normal, unmarked, with none of the swelling or bruising I would have expected from Ricard's brutal attack. I shook my head in frantic denial. "It's not possible." Katie led me into my bedroom. I sat before the mirror, tentatively touching my own reflection. My face was younger, rounder, and looked somehow unburdened and carefree. As Katie began to work on my hair, chattering away as usual, I realized with a jolt that I knew every word she was about to say. I had lived this moment before. Am I going mad? Is this real? I am supposed to be dead. And Toby said, "How can you think that? I finished the familiar sentence for her. "Mother doesn't care for all that, she just wants to know if you love me." Katie let out a startled laugh. "Oh dear. I must have told you all this before," she said, then smoothly moved on to a different court gossip. My eyes fell on the gown lying on my bed, a pale rose-pink affair meant to highlight my creamy skin tone. It was a garment from the famous seamstress Madame Foster, likely made in a hurry by one of her less experienced interns. The more skilled workers were always reserved for the high nobles. I remembered the mediocre sewing on this very dress had caused me enormous embarrassment. The ripped seam, which cut right beneath my breast, had led to my chest being revealed to at least 5 high-ranking noble heirs. I believed, with a cold certainty, that it was the precise moment Silas's obsession with me began. The court story, of course, ended up wildly embellished, that I had flashed him on purpose and pursued him aggressively out of jealousy toward my sister. I was standing on a precipice, wondering what was reality and what was ghost. I quickly pulled on the rose-pink dress, and as I stepped to adjust the front, my foot caught the inside hem. Sure enough, I heard the telltale rip, and my left breast immediately fell out of the seam. Katie gasped, aghast. "Oh dear. Oh dear. This isn't supposed to happen. These expensive modistes are nothing but thieves," she exclaimed. She helped me take it off. "Sew both sides securely," I commanded, my voice surprisingly steady. "I don't want such an accident." I ran my finger along the delicate fabric of the mask that would soon cover my face. My foolish, naive former self had completely fallen for Ricard that night. He had quickly covered me with his jacket, rushed me to the women's powder room and found a maid to mend the dress. The Duke's masked ball was the grand herald of the season, celebrating the arrival of spring. Only the creme de la creme of Tangoria were invited. We, as minor nobles, were definitely not part of that cream. My father had brazenly bribed someone in the Duke's office to add our names to the list. Dizit. By the time I descended the stairs, I found my whole family assembled. Father, my 3 sisters, Astoria, Astrid, and Asa, and my 2 co-mothers, secondary mother Rona and third mother Carly. My primary mother had died giving birth to me. I took them all in, the sight catching my breath. In the end, it had only been Astoria and I who survived. Well, only Astoria, truly. I felt a twinge of bitter resentment. Astoria had come to hate me, claiming I stole her husband's affection. Yet she conveniently forgot that when Ricard initially failed to get me to Silas's bed, her own tearful pleas had ultimately sent me there. Silas's uncle was the head of the Justice Ministry, and perhaps complaints about father's bribery and corruption were piling up on his desk. The same crimes they accused him of were performed by the high houses on a grander scale, but rumours that the king was about to elevate father's status to count didn't settle well. They wanted him gone. Silas had promised he would help, if only I became his mistress. He never kept his end of the bargain. I had lost my entire family to death, and my remaining sister to crushing resentment. Well, you took your sweet time, father grumbled, pulling me from my thoughts. Do you know how much gold I had to bleed for us to get these invitations? Sorry, Papa. My dress seems to have been poorly made, I told him. He waved me off, dismissing the issue. Secondary mother Rona pursed her lips. I'll have a serious word with that Madam Foster, she muttered under her breath, confirming my suspicion that my dress wasn't the only faulty one. All right. Crisis averted, we should get going, he said, herding us all toward the door. We settled into the family's long carriage. Secondary mother Rona's eyes were alight with excitement. I knew this day would come. All those turned-down marriage proposals were for this very night. Do you girls know how many eligible men there will be? I heard through the grapevine that the 6 princes will be in attendance tonight, all of them unattached. Imagine the boon it will be if one or more of our girls catches their eyes. Third mother Carly clicked her tongue. Now, Rona, aren't we aiming a bit too high? Rona raised her head proudly. Just look at our girls, Carly. You and I have personally reviewed all the noble young women, and none of them measure up. Yes, they are more educated in the classics, but men don't look for a tutor in a wife. Hear, hear, father agreed heartily. Asa rolled her eyes, the youngest and the family's rebel. I offered her a small, knowing smile. My breath hitched in my throat as the carriage reached the end of the street and past the Duke of Rinder's place, the estate where, only moments ago, I had died. Father looked behind him at the largest house on our street and smiled. You know, Aspen, the young heir Ricard always asks about you when I meet him. Polite young man and easy-going, he commented casually. Absolutely not, I declared with sudden desperate passion. Do not even consider it, Papa. I shall not marry him. He looked at me askance, his lips forming a thin, angry line. Who said he wants to marry you? And even if he did, how could you possibly refuse? This ducal house is one of the 9 dual pillars of this kingdom. No, I shall not hear your nonsense, he declared in a huff. I bit my lip in frustration. Well, Papa, if Aspen says she won't marry the man, I think you should force it, Asa said, showing her contrarian support. You will not speak nonsense, Asa, third mother chided, and Asa sat back with a pout. I leaned forward, my voice low and urgent. Papa, please, I beg you, among all the men you could marry me off to, don't let it be the Duke. Or, I paused, trying to find the right words. Secondary mother Rona raised a questioning eyebrow. He is no Duke yet, Aspen, just the heir. Good gracious, the theatrics today, she said, annoyed. I looked directly at her. You must vow to me, all of you, that we won't have anything to do with the high houses of Tangoria. Father, you must curb your ambitions. These high houses are snakes. No matter how much they bring you into their circle, they are always playing a higher game of deceit. We must find a way to keep away from everything. If anything, we must move back to the countryside. Absolutely not, Father exclaimed, incensed. Every eye in the carriage was fixed on me. as if I had lost my mind. Secondary Mother Rona reached over and gently patted my hand. Now, Aspen, calm down. Have you been sneaking into the wine cellar again? I shook my head, desperate for them to believe the truth. No, I'm completely sober. Please take this seriously. Aspen, that is enough, Astoria said, annoyed. Cold Feet shouldn't have you speaking like this. It's not Cold Feet. What if I told you that I've been here before? I began, the words tumbling out. No? Here, where? Third Mother asked, concern softening her eyes. Here, in this timeline, and everyone but Astoria ends up dead. Which isn't much to say because she ends up marrying Silas as his principal wife, and he will downgrade her to third wife so that he could marry Gemma who was married to Ilias, who ends up killed by Silas, and... My voice faded as I saw the dropped jaws in the carriage. Wow, that was entertaining, Secondary Mother Rona said, her voice strained. But please, dear, refrain from such madness from here on out. She handed me a small flask, genuine concern returning to her eyes. She was the only mother I truly knew. When my birth mother died, Rona was the one who had suckled me at her breast. Astoria was only a year old then. She had cared for me and nurtured me. I took the small flask. Place that in your pocket. I know your nerves are high, I understand. Tonight is a big night. You will do fine, she said, gently touching my chin. Ah, here we are, Third Mother announced. My shoulders sank. They didn't believe me. I didn't even completely believe me. I didn't know if this life I was now reliving was reality, or if the life I had just spent 15 years in was a dream. They all emptied the long carriage slowly. I covertly pinched myself hard on my upper arm. The pain was sharp and real. This cannot be a dream. Asa narrowed her eyes at me, but then simply left the carriage. I walked toward the back of the group, but Astoria looked back at me with palpable annoyance and waited. I was supposed to walk next to her as the second-born, just behind our parents, with Astrid and Asa following as the two youngest. Down it, she ordered, nodding towards the flask. I uncorked it and drank half of the smooth but bitter spirit, feeling it spread a sudden warmth through my stomach. Don't fuck this up for me, she commanded, looping her hand through mine as we took our proper positions. The footman who announced us was identical to my memory. The intense mingling smells of roasted food and expensive perfume were the same. Roasted quail was indeed supposed to be on the menu, seasoned with a newly imported and popular spice called leaden, which would soon become scarce and command a high price. Rickard would be wearing a cream-white suit with gold buttons, making his thick golden hair shine. His appearance would perfectly complement mine all night, and the guests would not fail to remark on how suited we were for each other. If these final details happened, then I would know for sure that I had somehow, through a strange loop of the High Father or the conniving games of the three mothers, truly travelled back in time. I was asked to dance many times. Halfway through the night, the quail meat was served. It was an instant hit among the guests. Quail was usually a commoner's dish, but tonight, because of the succulent flavour lent by the leaden spice, it was wildly popular. I spotted my father at a distance, engaged in conversation with a young man who had golden hair and wore expensive cream-white clothing. My heart sank. I should have felt jubilant that I had been given a second chance at life, but I was instead terrified. No matter what I did now, I feared nothing would change. Chapter 3. The Serpent's Garden. I moved slowly around the elaborate ballroom, trying to absorb every detail. Every gilded corner, every whispering group was precisely as I remembered it. There was Count Mordecai, a man nearing 80, yet still aggressively scouting for his third wife. I wondered with a grim inner jest what the old goat was truly looking for at that age. There was Lady Penelope, fiercely ensuring her daughter caught the attentions of the eligible Count Dorian. I reached the sprawling buffet table, where a footman was painstakingly refilling the wine pyramid. I held out my hand, expecting the already filled transparent glass cup he was dispensing, but shook my head and pointed to the uncorked bottle. He paused, glancing from me to the bottle, then handed it over with a slight look of confusion before opening a fresh bottle to continue his task. My eyes swept the crowd. Everyone seemed to be enjoying a glorious, oblivious time. I remembered feeling the same innocent joy the first time I had attended this ball. I made my way to the last of the 3 balconies and stepped outside. The air was a warm, heavy, humid breeze, thick with the scent of the garden flowers. This sweet, cloying aroma was infinitely preferable to the close atmosphere of perfumed bodies inside, which too closely recalled the noxious celebratory stench of Silas's recent banquet. A sound, a woman's low, throaty giggle, made me realize I was not alone. Secreted in a dark corner against the stone wall were a tall, dark-clad figure and a woman in a vivid red dress. The darkness was deep enough that I couldn't immediately make out their features. I leaned against the cool balustrade, lifting the wine bottle to my lips. I tilted my head, trying to get a clearer view of the clandestine lovers. The man, much taller than his companion, lowered his head to kiss her neck. As he did, the woman's face came into my view. I recognized her immediately, and, just as immediately, she saw me. She quickly pushed the man away, stepping back in alarm. My focus locked onto him. I felt a chill. It felt like only a few hours had passed since his decapitated head had been displayed on a golden pole. Prince Ilias. A long, controlled breath hissed from my lips. The woman, having assessed me, quickly straightened her gown and raised her chin. Her initial embarrassment hardened into an icy annoyance at my lack of manners in staring. I should bow. I gave a slight formal dip toward Ilias. "Your Highness," I murmured. His lips curled into a fleeting, slightly amused smile. Then my attention turned to the woman, Alana Fontaine, the Dowager Duchess of Camara. I executed a low, respectful curtsy for her as well. She had lost her husband only the previous month. Her crimson dress was deliberately cut, not to convey grief, but to spectacularly show off her assets. Her breasts looked ready to spill from the bodice. Her golden hair gleamed under the scant light. She was a renowned beauty. "Who are you?" Her sharp, direct words cut through the silence. I was briefly taken aback that she didn't recognize me, then quickly remembered the awkward reality. I had somehow travelled years into the past. "Aspen Ashley, my father is Baron Stannis," I told her. I could see her mind working furiously, scanning the periphery of nobility, struggling to place a Baron Ashley. A dismissive smile coated her lips once she gave up the effort. Her eyes darted quickly back to the silent prince beside her. "You must be new," she concluded. "You are such a pretty girl. I would love to show you the ropes." She pulled a card from her sleeve and offered it to me. "Come to my house for tea, will you?" Her attention had already flickered back to Ilias. "Oh, well, I must go inside, Your Highness. It was nice to see you." Her velvety voice drifted away as she retreated. I looked down at the card, then placed it carelessly on the stone balustrade, taking another deliberate sip of my wine. I heard more than saw Ilias move to stand next to me, his movements completely silent. I raised an eyebrow at him. "Can I help you?" He looked genuinely surprised by my brusque lack of decorum. He glanced at the card I had discarded. "Many people would be extremely pleased to be invited to Lady Camara's tea parties," he observed. "I know," I replied, the words casual but deeply true. In another life, had I been given the invitation, I would have been excited too. He chuckled, a rich, deep sound, and leaned over the balustrade in a rakish posture. I noticed that his neatly combed hair, which must have started the night perfectly styled, was now clearly finger-combed by his lover. "Which life are you living now?" he asked, clearly intrigued. "I think this is my second go at it." "Really? What happened in your previous one, or do you not remember?" "Oh, I remember everything," I began. He shook his head indulgently, his eyes sparkling and his teeth flashing in an amused grin. "Tell me then, do I get to be king of Doltria in the future?" I nearly told him that his pretty head ended up on a spike, but I caught myself. This was a prince of Doltria. I couldn't risk telling him his brother kills him. One of Ilias's main downfalls in my past life was his unwavering trust in his siblings. They had all turned on him, backing Silas despite Ilias being the rightful heir, only 3 days younger than his ambitious brother. "You see my dress, Your Highness?" I began, quickly changing the subject to something more immediate and less dangerous. "My second mother went to the most famous modiste in the capital months ago, before the spring season began, when her business was slow. Second mother paid over the normal peak season price, which gained us a guarantee that Madame Foster would personally make my sisters and my dresses. She delayed, you see, waiting for certain material to be imported." When the material finally came, it was almost the beginning of the season. Orders started pouring in, and you would think our prepaid order would be attended to first, but it wasn't. We waited months for priority service, and we only received the dresses yesterday, with poor quality workmanship. Madame Foster relegated her duty to one of her interns, the least skilled one, if I'm to guess. The high ladies, with their power and fancy backing, received high-quality work in a short amount of time. I finished, my voice laced with a genuine weary scorn. His eyes were narrowed now. The playful smile was gone. He was focused, processing the story not as gossip, but as a clear example of systemic corruption. It was at that moment that Ricard appeared, executing a perfect bow to Ilias. "I believe our dance is about to begin," he stated, his voice a smooth veneer. I took his offered hand, immensely glad to be away from the intense, charged bubble that had formed around Ilias and me. While we were in the middle of our formal dance, Silas cut in, his presence immediately demanding, "Do you mind, my good lord?" I saw the briefest flash of irritation on Ricard's face, which he immediately masked, stepping back with perfect grace. This had all happened before in my previous life, but I had been too flustered then to notice the sharp edge of his compliance. Even now, the conversation between Silas and me was exactly the same. I forced a polite smile and nod, constantly scanning the clock, wondering when I could leave. The smell of his heavy, expensive cologne brought back a wave of visceral memories of the nights we had spent together. When the dance was finally finished, I begged off, citing exhaustion, and hurried to the powder room. I squeezed myself into a corner and sat down, wishing there was any way I could simply vanish from this place. Secondary Mother Rona entered the room moments later and sat down next to me. She offered a warm, polite smile to the other masked women touching up their makeup. Their tiny masks hardly covered anything, leaving their faces instantly recognizable. "The Duke and the Prince," she began in a low, conspiratorial voice. "You are doing very well, my dear." I shook my head. "I don't want either of those men, Mother," I confessed, frustrated that I kept getting pulled back into their orbit. "Who do you want, then?" she asked, her concern real. "Is there a particular gentleman you fancy? If he is from a good, acceptable family, I'll tell your father, and we can introduce ourselves." I slowly shook my head. "There is no one. I just don't want to be under any man's rule." "Is this about your dream again? You felt so differently this morning, so excited for this event. I don't know what happened during your preparations, but all that talk about going back to the countryside really upset your father." My eyebrows rose. Why does the thought of our country home in Linfields upset Father so much? She sighed and pressed her lips together. "Your father wasn't always this wealthy, you know. He hates talking about his past, but maybe keeping it from you girls has made you view him differently. When we were young, your father was dirt poor. Titled yes, but dirt poor. The Barron house was crumbling, half its roof torn off. He used to tend sheep. When the war with Caldera broke out, Duke Novias, the king's brother, was wounded. He was supposed to travel through the Temple's Valley, which was heavy with Caldera soldiers. The plan was to warn the king that they would be ambushed should they reach the valley. Many cowards shied away from the task, so Duke Novias had to do it himself. He was wounded, and your father hid him in his home. But your father saw an opportunity where others saw only the possibility of being captured by the Calderons who, you know, are famous for their particular brand of torture. Your father took the chance and managed to deliver the message. When the Calderons were defeated 6 months later, a royal reward came to your father. He had not expected it. The reward came with so much gold and wealth, yet his bravery wasn't enough for the people in Linfields to see him as anything more than the poverty-stricken orphan boy who sometimes scavenged through the trash when he was hungry. When he was called here to the capital to join the Ministry of Commerce, it was a reprieve and an opportunity to leave his old life behind. There is nothing your father wants more than for you girls never to suffer the way he did. Do you remember the first words of the Maiden's Prayer? She asked me. I nodded. Dear Three Mothers, I pray for your blessing of a good man who will provide for and love our children. Yes, a true Tangorian man has two great loves, himself and his children. She paused and gave me a sad smile, one I had never seen on her face, the truth plain in her eyes, that she too had settled for the respect he had for her, not his love. He would never deliberately pick someone for you girls who he knows would hurt you. He spends many hours looking into which of the men who have shown interest would be good for you and your sisters. What if he makes a mistake? I asked her. She sighed again, shaking her head. I'll try to make sure he doesn't. I promise you. I looked at a lady who was touching up her makeup in the mirror. What if I find a way to take care of myself? I asked her. How? There are not many ways a woman can do so, she said, her voice laced with the weariness of hard truth. It's unfair, I know, but it is the way it is. Unless you find a way to beat the system, we all just have to play along. Now, if you don't want the Duke's heir, find someone else. You can't make many decisions over your future marriage, but you can steer us in the right direction, she finished, and I found myself nodding slowly. The reality of my existence as a woman was plain and clear. I was a passenger in my previous life. I refused to be one again. I got up and held up my hand to her. You are right, Mother. You are very right, I told her, and he took my hand with a smile. When we joined the other dancers, I found Silas waiting for me. Are you well, my lady? He asked, then bowed smoothly to Mother. I hope you are having a good evening, my lady, he murmured to her, his manners impeccable. She gave him a warm smile and left us. My eyes fell on a dark-clad figure leaning against a window frame across the room. Ilias, his vibrant purple eyes cut clearly across the dance floor to me. The intense stare made me shiver. Yes, Your Highness, I lied to Silas. I just needed to catch my breath. Of course, he smiled. Perhaps we can take a walk in the garden for some fresh air. I swallowed hard, acutely familiar with Silas's walks in the garden. He loved a quick tryst at balls with the distant music and the heavy scent of flowers as a backdrop. I shook my head quickly. The three-step partner's dance is coming. Please, it's my favourite, I told him, desperately avoiding being alone with him. As we took our positions for the line dance, a line of men facing a line of women, I saw Ilias take a position 3 steps down from Silas. The move was utterly deliberate. The dance dictated that I would spend the most time with the third man on the line. As the music began, I tried to let my mind drift, realizing this specific pairing and interaction had never happened in my first life. When I found myself standing opposite Ilias, I struggled to maintain a polite smile. His expression remained neutral, yet somehow I regretted telling him what I did on the balcony. I was now on his radar, something that absolutely had not been true in my previous life. Chapter 4. The Serpent and the Spice. The morning after the Duke's mask ball dawned bright and humid, a stark contrast to the deep, silent darkness that had ended my previous life. The sun streamed through the east-facing windows of the dining room at Baron Stannis Ashley's residence, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air and casting a glare on the silver breakfast service. The scent of roasted venison sausages and newly brewed caffeine was thick in the air, a familiar comfort that now felt unsettlingly precious and reverent. A peacefulness I haven't felt in years settled over me. I sat at the long table, picking listlessly at a piece of toasted brioche. Around me, the energy was almost explosive. My 3 sisters, Astoria, Astrid, and Asa, were still dizzy from the social frenzy of the previous night. My feet are ruined, Astrid sighed dramatically, pulling her slippered foot onto the chair beside her to rub her arch. Astrid was the middle sister, known for her elaborate lace and a perpetually romantic disposition, which I knew would eventually lead her into a deeply unsatisfying marriage to a viscount obsessed with hunting dogs, a coward of the highest order who divorced her after father's peers turned on him. But the dancing, Astrid. Did you see how many times Lord Farley asked you to lead? Astoria countered, her voice sharp with a mix of genuine excitement and subtle competitiveness. Astoria, the elder, was already strategizing. She wore a simple morning gown, but her posture was royal, rehearsed. I knew her goal: to secure a respectable, profitable match before her 24th birthday, a plan that in my previous timeline had gone spectacularly sideways, joyous for her at first but miserable in the end. I heard the gossip, Asa murmured, stirring her coffee vigorously. Asa, the rebel, wore trousers under her dress gown and was studying me with unnerving intensity, still puzzling over my frantic pronouncements in the carriage. They say Lord Farley only cares for dowry, but he certainly lingered. Who cares for him anyway? Did you see the Dark Prince, Ilias? He was breathtaking even with that ridiculous silver mask. Heck, everyone's masks were ridiculous. You could clearly tell who was who. My secondary mother, Rona, who sat at the head of the table, beamed like a proud lioness. It was a triumph, girls, an absolute triumph. Lady Penelope's daughter barely received 3 dances after the midnight hour. But my Aspen... She turned her attention to me, her voice softening with pride and a calculated measure of political manoeuvring. You are a true star. To dance with both the king's sons and the duke's heir, and for the king's eldest son, Silas himself. To cut in. Ah, you should have heard the gasps from the old bats, asking who the upstart girl was. The jealousy was ridiculous, she said with a flourish. Baron Stannis is the envy of the ministry this morning, mark my words. Third Mother Carly, ever the pragmatist, nodded. Indeed, girls, proposals are pouring in already. We had a good amount we went through just this morning and forwarded some to your father's office. He is already reviewing the list of interested parties. But we must be swift. Aspen, Silas, and Rickard were merely courting you. They were not proposing. Focus your charm elsewhere as well, my dear. She paused when the footman came in with a message for her. She read it, and her face fell. What is it, Carly? Mother Rona asked. She shook her head. Another of Father's ships was hit by bad weather at sea. Things with the shipping side have been going sideways since he stopped going to sea himself. My brothers and uncles are completely useless, so they've decided to close off the shipping business for now, focusing only on the real estate here, she said sadly. Roan nodded and offered some platitudes. My mind, however, was on her words about Rickard and Silas. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach, turning the brioche to ash. The path was already laid out, the wheels of fate grinding toward a gruesome, inevitable end. Rickard's manipulation, Silas's dark demands, and the cold water of my demise. They saw these men as opportunities. I saw them as executioners. I am not going to be a passenger this time, I reminded myself quietly. Did you notice the food, Mother? I asked Rona, steering the conversation towards the single item I cared about at the whole party. The food? Rona frowned slightly. Well, the pastry swans were certainly impressive, but honestly, Aspen, you were barely interested in eating. You looked quite green. The quail specifically, I persisted. The roasted quail. Ah, yes. Such a novelty, isn't it? Astrid chimed in, forgetting her aching feet. It was commoner's food, but so delicious. Everyone was raving about it. I heard the cook used a new spice that had just been imported from the Southern Isles. They called it leaden, I supplied, the name sharp and clear. Leaden, yes. I heard the head chef of the Duke's house paid a low sum for the spice. Duke Everand prides himself in being luxuriously frugal, whatever that means, Astoria said, her voice bored. Carly snorted. Ah, these nobles, it's always something new and niche they always run to, isn't it? But the spice was so unique, so warm, so... Dultrian, somehow. I've lived in Tangoria all my life, but never had something like that. As the conversation continued, the seed of an idea blossomed into a blinding vision of opportunity. This was the key. Not my ultimate freedom. It's always about money in the end. The nobles turn their noses at the mention of it, but they are the most greedy for it. People hadn't realized the true value of Leyden, not just as a novelty, but as an essential flavor that would define the culinary standard for the coming decades. In my previous life, Leyden had become ubiquitous and ruinously expensive, an indicator of wealth and taste that had fueled the fortunes of several minor trading houses. Its initial popularity had been a controlled surge, monopolized by a few sharp traders. The source where it had been bought originally at a cheap price had hiked up the prices after demand for it, not only in Tangoria, but all of Doltria. I knew the price of Leyden now, cheap, undiscovered, sitting in barrels in remote southern ports. I knew the price of Leyden in the future, a king's ransom. I excused myself from the table, feigning a sudden headache from the wine. The scent of the perfume. It's still lingering. Back in the privacy of my sun-drenched chamber, the urgency became palpable, tightening my chest. I had to move, and I had to move now. The window for this venture was narrow, perhaps only a few weeks before the capital's powerful trading guilds got wind of the spice and its true potential, cornering the market and rendering my future knowledge useless. My initial thoughts turned to a message. I crossed to my writing desk, pulled out a small piece of parchment, and penned a simple, terse note, seeking immediate transport of bulk commodity from the Southern Isles. Urgent meeting required tonight. Timothy Dandridge was a name I was familiar with. He was a sailor who used to work for the Umbridge shipping, owned by Third Mother Carly's family. Now that they were closing business, many of them would lose their jobs. His name was familiar because he had turned spy for Ilias in the future and was executed, him and his mother, for trying to aid the rightful king. His known residence was the rooms he used to rent for him and his mother at the Black Swan Inn. I remembered Ricard describing the man as an honest fool, too caught up in doing what is right and not beneficial to him. I sealed the note with an unidentifiable wax seal I usually used for old letters to long-forgotten aunts. The key was delivery. I needed speed and absolute discretion. I quietly opened my door and scanned the hallway. Below stairs, the footmen were usually a swarm of buzzing blue and gold uniforms, but among them was an older man named Merrick. He had once been my primary mother's personal retainer and was often overlooked now, considered slow and nearing retirement, but I remembered him as fiercely loyal and utterly silent. He was the one. I waited until I heard the clatter of the kitchen staff moving the lunch trolleys, a perfectly timed distraction. I slipped out and found Merrick polishing a trophy near the main staircase. "Merrick," I whispered, keeping my voice low and firm. He straightened slowly, his old eyes crinkled at the corners, meeting mine. "My Lady Aspen. You look pale. Is everything well?" "Perfectly well, thank you. I have a delicate errand. It requires speed and silence, and it is vital that neither my father nor the mothers know of it, or anybody in this household for that matter. I need you to take this to the Black Swan Inn. Do not engage in conversation. Hand it directly to the innkeeper and say only this. This is for a sailor named Timothy Dandridge. Tell him the matter is urgent." I placed 2 large silver coins, a generous sum, into his palm, closing his fingers over them. "Can you do this for me, Merrick?" His eyes widened slightly at the payment, but he simply nodded once, pocketed the note and the coins, and turned without another word. He will not fail me. With the message dispatched, I turned to the second, more painful necessity. Capital. I locked my bedroom door and went to my small inlaid cedar jewellery box. Independence required sacrifice. I opened the box, the mingled scent of rosewood and age rising up. I didn't possess the glittering, famous heirloom pieces that adorn the king's wives or the duchesses. My jewels were the modest, practical pieces inherited from my mother or given by my father or mothers as gifts. A garnet brooch, a thick gold locket with my mother's likeness, and the single most valuable item. A delicate silver filigree necklace set with small, but flawlessly cut, dark sapphires. I lifted the sapphire necklace, the cool metal heavy in my hand. These pieces, the last vestiges of a mother I never knew. Her image hung in the hallway, her face unfamiliar. The only things I inherited from her were her green eyes and height. Everything else, my hair, my skin tone, my smile, my nose, was from my father, a handsome man whose notably pleasant looks he passed on to all 4 of his daughters. None of us carried anything distinct from our mothers. I wrapped the necklace and the garnet brooch in a velvet cloth, calculating their worth. It wouldn't be a fortune, but it would be enough for the initial outlay and the sailor's retainer. The sun was high in the sky, bringing in rain clouds. The time for the meeting was approaching. I needed to be unrecognizable. I pulled on the plainest, darkest dress I owned, a rough, serviceable wool meant for travel. Over it, I donned a heavy, hooded cloak made of thick, homespun fabric, ensuring my face and hair would be completely obscured from casual view. My long, dark blonde hair, which Silas had complimented last night, was bound severely and hidden under the hood. I tucked the velvet cloth containing the jewels and a small leather coin purse deep inside my bodice. The lower districts of the capital, where the Black Swan Inn stood, were a world away from the manicured parks and marble plazas of the court quarter. The streets were narrow, slick with grease and yesterday's rain. The air here was heavy with the smells of stale beer, wood smoke, cheap tobacco, and the harsh, salty tang of the docks. I moved with a practiced speed, keeping to the shadows, relying on the cloak to hide myself. The Black Swan Inn, was a dilapidated 3-story building that leaned precariously toward the street. The ground floor was a tavern, the sign a faded depiction of a swan that looked more like a sickly goose, creaked mournfully in the twilight breeze. I paused just outside, taking a final deep breath of the foul air to steady my nerves. This environment was hostile, and I was utterly alone, relying only on my desperate hope and the knowledge of a future I was trying to erase. I pushed the heavy, oil-stained wooden door open. The tavern was a cavern of noise and chaos. The light was dim, relying on guttering tallow candles and the glow from the massive central hearth. The air inside was dense with the reek of sweat, cheap spirits, and overcooked fatty meat. Rough voices brawled over a game of dice in one corner. A group of sailors sang a bawdy shanty near the bar. I tried to melt into the shadows near the entrance, scanning the room for the innkeeper. That's when my eyes snagged on a figure seated alone at a rickety table near the hearth. He was dressed in ordinary worn workman's clothes, dark, rough wool trousers, a simple linen tunic, and a heavy, threadbare vest. His hands, resting on the table next to a half-empty tankard, were strong and calloused, seemingly accustomed to labour. His hair, usually neatly styled into the elaborate court fashion, was loose and messy, falling over his brow. He looked utterly anonymous, blending perfectly with the dock workers and petty criminals in the room. The gold earrings that usually braceleted his ears and the rings on his fingers were absent. But I knew the shoulders, the distinctive set of his jaw, and the deep, unforgettable purple eyes that lifted and fixed on me through the darkness. Prince Ilias. He looked nothing like the masked courtier from the previous night, yet his presence here, in this squalid den, was utterly unmistakable. I strode toward his table, forgetting caution in my annoyance. I kept my voice low, but the hostility was clear. "Your Highness," I hissed, pulling back my hood just enough so he could confirm my identity, then quickly drawing it forward again. "What in the name of the 3 mothers are you doing here? And do you mind?" I asked, concerned. If he wanted cheap liquor, he could have asked one of his servants to collect for him. My mouth, having ideas of its own, continued. "You smell of cheap spirits and 3 days spent on a fishing trawler," I chided him, taking in his appearance. Ilias chuckled, a low, easy sound that was far too amiable for this situation. He lifted his tankard to me in a mock salute. "And you, my lady of the baronage, smell of rosewater and misplaced disapproval. You left your own golden cage far behind to visit the Black Swan. I suppose that makes us both equally ill-advised." He rose slowly, gracefully, despite his rough costume, and took a step closer, his eyes intense beneath the grime of his clothes, though his skin looked clean. I hated that I noticed that. "I am on urgent private business. Unlike you, I'm not here to partake of cheap spirits in questionable atmosphere," I insisted, fighting the instinct to retreat from his proximity. "My business involves high risks, and frankly, I don't need the king's son attracting attention to me. Now, if you would kindly disappear before someone recognizes you and harms you, I'd be grateful." He ignored the request entirely. His gaze lingered on my face, then dipped slightly to my concealed figure, taking in the contrast between my noble features and the peasant's cloak. He lifted one hand, slightly stained with what looked like wine or grease, in a gesture that asked for silence. "Cantat." Then, to my utter astonishment, he began to speak, his voice dropping into a clear, resonant baritone that was barely audible over the din, yet somehow commanded my full attention. "The darkness shields you well today, a shadowed shape in wool so crude. Yet through the folds your dark gold hair still lights, a memory of yesterday's mood. They say the masks reveal the soul, but I saw only shadows fall, as you, dear Aspen, took the toll, and stole the hearts of one and all." He finished the short poem with a slight sardonic bow. "Forgive my manners, Lady Aspen. I find poetry often cuts through the annoyance. You were the subject of much discussion this morning. You successfully drew the attention of my brothers, my cousin, and the Duke's heir. A masterful performance, delivered all with a scowl on your face the majority of time at the ball." "It wasn't a performance," I retorted, stung by the memory of the sheer terror that had fueled my decisions. "It was necessary maneuvering. Now, I have a meeting." "With whom?" he asked, taking another sip of his cheap spirit. That is none of your concern, Your Highness. Perhaps not, he agreed easily. Yet he followed me as I moved toward the back of the tavern, where a small rickety door marked private consultations stood slightly ajar. But considering you might have had a tragic last life, I gathered from your reluctance to speak of it, perhaps I should ensure your second act does not end as poorly as your first. A prince's interest in the local tavern is easily dismissed. A baron's daughter meeting an unknown man in a back room is not. He pushed the door open before I could stop him and stepped into the cramped, windowless room, forcing me to follow, his tone joking at the reference to my past life. The room smelled faintly of mildew and fish. Seated at the small, scarred wooden table was a man, Timothy Dandridge. He was a sailor, no doubt, tall and strongly built, with weather-beaten skin and a serious, handsome face, and large, desperate blue eyes that darted between us. His clothes were threadbare, and his hands tapped nervously on the tabletop. He was clearly down on his luck, exactly as the footman had reported. "Mr. Timothy Dandridge?" I asked, keeping my face shaded. He nodded quickly, his eyes still fixed on Ilias's imposing, although roughly dressed, figure. "I was told to meet a lady in Ash. I did not expect company." He swallowed hard, nervously pushing a stray lock of greasy brown hair from his forehead. I pulled out the velvet cloth containing the sapphires and the garnet brooch, placing them heavily on the table. The sudden flash of silver and dark blue against the dull wood was dramatic, making Ilias raise a dark brow. "I have a proposition for you, Mr. Dandridge," I said, my voice adopting the hard, precise tone of a trader. "A guaranteed return, provided you act immediately and with complete discretion." "I'm listening, milady," Timothy replied, his eyes fixed on the jewels. I pointed to the sapphires. "This is your retainer. It will cover your costs for the first leg of your journey. I need you to sail to the Southern Isles, not to the capital port, but to the secondary markets in the remote trading colonies. Specifically, I need you to procure as much of the local spice known as leaden as you can carry." Timothy's brow furrowed. "Leaden? That little red grain? They use it in some of the local stews down south. It's cheap, used for dye sometimes. Why would you want bulk leaden, milady? A few ounces would suffice for any kitchen." "Because it is about to become the single most sought-after commodity in all of Tangoria soon," I stated simply, leaning forward. "It debuted last night at the Duke's Mask Ball. It was a sensation. Within the next month, the cost here will increase by 20-fold. Within 6 months, it will be irreplaceable in any noble kitchen. The market is not yet aware of its value. I am." Timothy rubbed his chin, sceptical but desperately tempted by the sight of the golden jewels. "It's a long journey, milady. And while the spice is cheap there, a full cargo hold of anything requires significant coin. These pieces will cover the ship's journey and secure packaging of the product, but not the commodity itself, in an amount you might need for business." Ilias, who had been silently leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest, finally moved. He pushed himself off the frame and walked to the table, his presence suddenly immense and dominating the cramped space. "Mr. Dandridge here speaks the truth, Lady Aspen," Ilias said, his purple eyes gleaming. His gaze was solely on me. "If your prediction is true, you must buy all of it, every last grain you can acquire from the colonies. Corner the initial market before the larger guilds even know a market exists." I felt a flash of resentment at his intrusion, but the logic was undeniably sound. All of it. That was the true path to control. "Ilias, Ilias, Ilias," I said, using his first name with sharp familiarity. "I do not have the funds for all of it. This is all my pin money and inheritance from my mother. I just need enough spice for it to give me modest wealth and security to determine my own future." Ilias scoffed, shaking his head. "A modest fortune buys you a husband who will simply beat you less often, or one who will still trade you for a title. Independence, Aspen, is not bought modestly. It is taken through dominance. If you want true independence, then be sure to bet on something with everything." He took out a small book, wrote out something on it, and placed it on the table. "Or she'd go to the Goran Bank. This amount will buy the entire initial harvest from 3 Southern Isles ports. Also, Umbridge is going out of the shipping business. One of his smaller ships is in excellent shape and a fast runner. He will be willing to sell it to you at an affordable price, to recoup his last losses. If you work fast enough and come up with a crew of trusted, hard-working men, you will be ready by morning. Do you think you can handle it? He asked Timothy, the sheer confidence in his voice ringing through the little room. Timothy's eyes, now very sharp and determined, nodded. I won't disappoint you, sir, his tough voice said. I am not an expert in spices, but I am an expert in political maneuvering and leveraging chaos. And I do love a good gamble. I am offering to be your partner on 2 conditions, Ilias said, looking at me and Timothy. My heart hammered against my ribs. A prince, a powerful figure I desperately needed to avoid, was offering me the very capital I needed to escape him and everyone around him. The irony was suffocating. Laughable. Conditions, I managed, my voice suddenly dry. First, I will cover the full cost of the commodity and shipping. We split the profits equally among us 3 upon the sale of the first bulk shipment, back in Tangoria. He paused, letting the immense offer settle. Second, you keep my partnership in all this silent. Should it become known that you and Mr. Dandridge here are involved in business, my name remains out of it. I looked at the piece of paper with his name and stamp on it, the large amount of gold, then at the desperate sailor who saw the name on the banknote, his eyes widening with realization, and finally back to the intense, intelligent eyes of the Dark Prince. The risk was monumental. Partnering with Ilias tied my fate directly to his, a man who in years to come would be executed by his own brother. But without the capital, I was doomed to Ricard's brutal greed, to the death of my family. With this gold, I could buy the life I needed. And perhaps, just perhaps, my future knowledge could save him and all those I love, which might, in turn, save me. I looked at Timothy, who nodded to me. Then I reached out my hand to Ilias. Done, Your Highness, but if you betray me, I will ensure I make your life miserable. A genuine smile, free of courtly masks, finally broke across Ilias's face. I wouldn't expect anything less, Lady Aspen. The negotiation was swift. I pulled out a fresh piece of parchment from my bodice and dipped a quill into the innkeeper's cheap inkwell. We quickly drafted a brief contract binding all 3 of us. Ilias, in his rough workman's clothes, signed his name with the sweeping elegance of royalty. I signed mine with a steady hand, and Timothy, in blocky, practical script. I instructed Timothy, you will sail as soon as you can gather your crew. Take the gold, use what you need for supplies and crew, but spend the rest entirely on Leyden. Do not haggle. Just buy it all. Do not mention the spice to anyone until you return to me. Our next meeting will be in exactly 3 months. Same place, same time. Timothy, carefully folding the banknote and the sapphire necklace, which Ilias insisted he take as part of his generous retainer, stood up, a new fire in his eyes. Consider it done, Lady Aspen. I will move faster than the tides. He bowed quickly to us both and slipped out the private room door and back into the chaos of the tavern. Ilias and I were left alone in the small room. He looked at me, his gaze now speculative. So, Lady Aspen, he said, his voice low, a conspiratorial murmur. I would really like to hear about the first life you told me about last night. I pulled my cloak tighter, the smell of cheap spirits and ambition filling the air. In the light of the new day, perhaps it's not so wise to tell people that I am reliving my life. I plastered a smile on my face and looked at him. I would advise you not to pay attention to the rumblings of a drunk woman, I said. He raised his brow and followed me as I walked out of the tavern. What if those rumblings are the most interesting thing I've ever heard at a ball? Then I'll say you need to improve your company, Your Highness. Plunging necklines and scandal easily get old, and don't make the hallmarks of loyalty in friends, I told him, thinking of how even Lady Kamara abandoned him when he was usurped. He laughed out loud. Hear, hear. That is particularly wise advice. I nodded, looking around for a carriage to take. Tell me, Aspen, he said, moving closer to me, his voice suddenly seductively low. When do I see you again? A jolt ran through me and my heart quickened. I looked up at him, swallowed and shook my head. A smile came on his lips that suddenly annoyed me because he knew the effect he had on me. The garden parties at the palace, then? He supplied. I looked away and shook my head. I'm not high enough on the social ladder to be invited to such prestigious events, I said offhandedly, and waved for a carriage that stopped. I got on and looked at Ilias, who was looking at me speculatively. We'll see about that, he murmured as I moved away. Chapter 5. The Royal Gambit. The atmosphere at the Ashley breakfast table the following morning was far less frenetic than the day before, yet it hummed with a different, lower-frequency energy, one of strategic anticipation. Yesterday's social triumph at the masked ball had been duly dissected and recorded. The various dances and compliments tallied like ledger entries. Now, everyone was waiting for the inevitable follow-up. Baron Stannis Ashley, my father, sat at the foot of the table, a sturdy, handsome man whose face usually reflected the cautious optimism of a merchant navigating choppy political waters. He was currently shielded behind the sprawling front page of the Ministry Standard, intermittently grumbling about the King's latest tariff proposal. Carly, my third mother, efficiently managed a large stack of correspondence, sorting them into urgent, discard, and Astoria's admirers. Rona, my secondary mother, and the driving engine of our social campaign, was presiding over the silver service like a general overseeing a battlefield. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the footmen as they moved, ensuring every movement was precise. My sisters, Astoria, Astrid, and Asa, were discussing the merits of a new silk merchant. The crimson they use, Astoria insisted. It bleeds too quickly. Wealth means nothing if the fabric looks cheap by the second wear, Astrid, and besides, it looks very wasteful. But the cut is so very daring, dearest sister, Astrid countered, sighing dramatically. And daring is what secures the initial interest. I imagine Count Lukov will not take his eyes off you this afternoon when you go for a ride if you wore this. Astoria rolled her eyes, but a smile played on her lips. I, Aspen, sat quietly, stirring my cooling tea, taking in the precious moment for what it was and how easy it was to lose it. The thought made me firm in my belief that I had made the wise choice in the partnerships I entered into yesterday. Timothy Dandridge would be done gathering his crew even now, the wheels of our freedom already in motion. All I needed was distraction and time, both of which Ilias had just delivered in spectacular, unasked-for fashion. A junior footman approached Rona, holding out a silver tray bearing a single piece of thick, heavy cream-coloured cardstock. It bore the unmistakable, intricate embossed crest of the royal family. Rona frowned slightly, taking the card. "What is this?" She broke the scarlet wax seal, a perfect, deeply impressed crown with a sharp fingernail, her hands slightly trembling. She opened the invitation and began to read, her eyes quickly scanning the elegant, flowing script. At first, her expression was one of confused professionalism. Then her eyes widened impossibly, her jaw dropping slowly until the delicate piece of buttered toast she was lifting to her mouth slipped entirely from her fingers, landing silently on the starched white tablecloth. She made a guttural noise. "Rona!" Stannis peered over his newspaper, annoyed. "Control yourself, woman. Is it the king himself demanding payment on my outstanding shipping tax?" My father added the last part with a joking tone. Rona ignored him, her voice a strained, high-pitched whisper of disbelief. It is a season invitation. For the royal garden parties, for the entire season, for the entire Ashley household." A stunned silence fell over the table, broken only by the frantic scratching of Carly's quill pen, stopping abruptly mid-stroke. The royal garden parties were the pinnacle of court society. Intimate, highly controlled affairs held on the grounds of the Summer Palace, where true political and marriage alliances were forged away from the vulgarity of the public masks. Getting a single invitation to one event was the goal of a lifetime for a baron's daughter. Securing entrance for the whole family, for the whole season, was reserved only to a few. Only the most powerful dukedoms and ancient earls received such a blanket honour. Astoria gasped, clutching her lace collar. "The entire season? Mother, we would be made. The sheer number of introductions, the opportunities." Astrid had gone completely pale, whispering, "I don't even have enough gowns." Stannis finally lowered his paper, looking bewildered. "What nonsense is this? Rona, read the signature again. Did they send it to Baron Ashley, or to the Duke of something or other by mistake?" Rona, regaining her composure through sheer force of will, stood up, smoothing her dressing gown. It is addressed to Baron Stannis Ashley and family for the purpose of introducing his daughters to the royal court during the season. It is signed by the royal chamberlain himself. Stannis, tell me the truth. You finally cracked and bankrupted us trying to bribe the king's private secretary, didn't you? I told you only to try for 2 parties, not the whole season. How much did this cost us? Was it that new ship you were saving? Stannis slapped his paper aside, a look of offence on his face. Bribe? I would never— Well, I did try, but the goat refused it. He wanted more. It would cost a fortune I do not possess, and furthermore I wouldn't dare. Do you know the scandal if I were caught? I sent a polite inquiry, Rona, nothing more. A single, formal letter 2 months ago that was likely ignored. This cannot be my doing. It's probably a mistake. Carly, her pragmatist's mind already whirling through lists of suitable tailor recommendations, looked sharply at her husband. Then who? Why? I hope it isn't a mistake. Even if it is, I hope they don't realise it until we go to at least one party. I took a slow sip of my tea, preparing the delivery. I knew exactly who was behind this. Ilias's dramatic power play was a double-edged sword, highly dangerous but perfectly timed to give me the leverage I needed. For how? I set the teacup down with a light clink, looking at Carly. It was the Dark Prince, Mother. The air in the dining room turned to granite. The dust motes stopped dancing. Prince Ilias? Rona asked, almost choking on the mere name. She pressed a hand to her chest. Do not be ridiculous, Aspen. He is a handsome scandal, a rogue, a rake. He barely attends these things himself, let alone secures invitations for provincial barons. He is known for causing diplomatic incidents, not for furthering the careers of debutantes. Asa, the rebel, looked thrilled. The Dark Prince? I knew he noticed you. I noticed you too, conversing at the mask. He is deliciously dangerous, isn't he? Yes, I asked him then for the invitations. I fibbed, not wanting to tell them about my meeting with him yesterday. Stannis slammed his hand on the table, silencing the wagging tongues. His expression was thunderous, tinged with a genuine fear that cut through the pride. Enough. I forbid this speculation. Ilias is a dangerous entity. He is unstable, frequently associates with questionable people. I do not want any daughter of mine, particularly the one who possesses the least sense of self-preservation, anywhere near a known rake. If this is his doing, and the very notion is preposterous, then we will refuse the invitations. The sisters and mothers immediately erupted in a chorus of panicked outrage. Refuse? Astrid wailed. Father, it is social suicide. It is survival, Stannis retorted. I leaned forward, my tone carefully measured, calm, confident, and utterly unyielding. I needed to solidify my gains now. Father, I said, looking him directly in the eye, silencing the rising arguments of my sisters with the sheer focus of my gaze. You are right to worry about Prince Ilias's reputation, but you are wrong to worry about these invitations. They are secured. They are already in the hands of a dozen gossip mongers at the ministry who saw the royal seal on the messenger's dispatch box. To refuse now is to publicly insult a prince. No, the king himself. A choice far more dangerous than simply accepting his strange favour. I let that sink in. We all knew how father worked, so we remained silent as we watched the cogs and wheels in his brain spin. A smile finally crossed his lips. You are right. To refuse would be an insult to the entire royal household. But I want you to stay away from the young man, Missy. I will not have you associated with the black sheep of the royal family. Silas, on the other hand, I will not have Silas, father. I refuse it. Ah! He waved me away as he picked up his paper again. Getting back to the invitations, I continued, crossing my arms, you were preparing to spend a considerable sum, the price of half a small cargo ship, I recall, to bribe a clerk to secure 2 invitations to 1 or 2 parties. I have secured the entire season, covering 4 daughters through my own, shall we say, very adept social manoeuvring. I secured them without cost to the Ashley name. Carly, always a sharp accountant, understood immediately. Her eyes narrowed on Stannis. Stannis, she has a point, Carly stated, her voice tight. The bribe money. It is currently budgeted. Aspen secured the invitations. The budget remains. Rona nodded vigorously. Yes, we need new gowns. The whole seasonal budget must be released to Aspen, Stannis. It is only fair. Astoria and Astrid, sensing the opportunity for a massive shopping spree, abandoned their moral high ground and chorused, "Release the budget, father. It is her victory. A shopping excursion is required immediately to prepare." Stannis, surrounded by the 2 demanding wives and his 4 ambitious daughters, slumped. He knew he was beaten. To refuse the invitations was unthinkable. To deny Aspen credit, and therefore financial reward for securing them, was impossible under the collective pressure. He sighed, defeated. Very well. Aspen. The sum I had allocated for the securing of the invitations. It is yours. For the express purpose preparations, and I insist this, you will be accompanied by your sisters at all times in public. And you will not, under any circumstances, allow the Dark Prince to lure you into any kind of conversation that suggests he is anything more than a passing acquaintance. I smiled sweetly. Of course, father. Only passing acquaintances. The fruits of the gambit. By late morning, the breakfast table chaos had been replaced by the glorious, exhilarating chaos of the capital's high-end shopping district, and my private account was significantly heavier. I had received word from Timothy that he secured the ship and the crew, and they sailed by mid-morning, and now I had substantial funds for immediate tactical use. I was flanked by a determined legion of sisters. Rona and Carly had remained at home to draft acceptance letters and begin a frantic coordination with the dressmaker, but my 3 sisters had seized the opportunity for a preparatory expedition. Astoria, with her meticulous eye for lasting quality, was dragging us through the finest jewellery exchange, arguing passionately that a single high-carat ruby pendant was a better investment than a dozen minor diamond rings. Astrid, the romantic, kept sighing over ethereal fabrics and lace, dreaming of gowns perfect for whispered compliments in moonlit gardens. Asa, surprisingly, seemed most interested in securing the most comfortable walking boots under her skirts, keen on exploring the vast gardens. We moved as a glorious, unstoppable entity, the 4 Ashley daughters, all tall with dark, long blonde hair and green eyes, attracting attention everywhere we went. The newly secured royal garden invitations, though not publicly announced, seemed to pulse around us like an invisible aura of consequence. Tailors bowed deeper. Jewelers presented their finest sets. We need to secure at least 3 new day dresses and 2 evening gowns each. Aspen, Astoria dictated as we emerged from the renowned House of Delphine, servants laden with tissue-wrapped boxes. One should be a soft blue, reflective of the Ashley crest, and the other a bold gold to ensure you are seen at any distance. Nonsense, Astrid chimed in, adjusting a newly purchased velvet shawl. Aspen needs something scandalous, perhaps a deep emerald green, almost black, with a low-cut neckline. It would drive the Dark Prince wild. We are not trying to drive the Dark Prince wild, I sighed, watching a maid managing 4 hat boxes to the carriage. We are trying to secure a future of stability. Now, let us pause this strategic planning. We have earned a treat. Asa, walking beside me with the comfortable gait of someone already wearing the sensible boots she purchased, grinned. The Contessa's Crumb? The Contessa's Crumb, I confirmed. The Contessa's Crumb was the hottest new establishment in the capital. A pastry shop opened barely a week ago by chef Auguste Delacroix, who was rumoured to have been poached directly from the royal kitchens of a rival kingdom. It was the latest, most fashionable obsession among the nobility, promising pastries so delicate they were called edible philosophy. When our carriage finally reached the small, pristine shopfront, our enthusiasm evaporated. The place was famous, and the fame was currently materialised in a dense, well-dressed line that spilled halfway down the street. It was a line composed of minor barons, wealthy merchants' wives, and several identifiable, if lower-ranking courtiers. "Oh, for the love of the 3 mothers," Astoria groaned, immediately offended by the prospect of waiting in a public queue. "Is this truly worth the humiliation? We will be here for hours." "It is simply impossible, Aspen," Astrid declared, pouting. "Our ensembles will crease. Let us instruct the driver to return home. We can send a footman later." I was about to agree, disappointment settling heavy in my stomach, The last thing I needed was to attract attention in a public line, when a figure emerged from the shop. He was a small, neat man in a pristine white waistcoat, clearly the head waiter or manager, navigating the line with practiced diplomacy. He paused at the front, checked a list, spoke quickly to a duke's wife, and then, inexplicably, began to walk directly toward the very end of the line, where we stood. He stopped, bowing low enough for his silver-white hair to nearly graze the pavement. "My lady's Ashley," he murmured, his voice soft but clear. "Forgive the wait. Chef Delacroix sends his most profound apologies for the inconvenience. A table has been prepared for you. If you would follow me." The collective gasp from the nobles in the line was an audible, tangible thing. The duke's wife, who had been waiting for nearly an hour, glared daggers that could have cut steel. Astoria and Astrid instantly straightened, their earlier complaints forgotten, replaced by a mixture of shock and utter, triumphant pride. "But how did you know we were here?" Astrid whispered, dazzled. The waiter gave a small, discreet smile. "We received a special instruction, my lady. Please, do come in." We were led past the disgruntled crowd and into the Contessa's crumb. The interior was a masterpiece of delicate, light luxury. Pale green marble floors, gilded mirrors, and small, perfectly set tables. The air smelled intoxicatingly of vanilla, caramel, and newly roasted coffee. The waiter guided us to a prominent table set in a bay window, the best spot in the house, currently occupied by 2 men. The sisters, Eve and Asa, stopped dead in their tracks. The first man, seated with his back slightly to the room, was dressed in impeccable court attire. A perfectly tailored coat of rich dark velvet, linen that was dazzling white, and cuffs fastened with gold that caught the light. His dark hair, which I had mostly seen tousled, was neatly combed now, and the famed purple eyes, intense and unnervingly familiar, were fixed on our entrance. Ours. It was Prince Ilias. Seated opposite him was a younger man, perhaps 2 years my junior, with a fairer, more open face, who wore the same royal colours, but with far less arrogance. He was clearly Ilias's younger brother, Prince Valerias. Valerias was charming and conventional. He was meant to be the foil to Ilias's darkness. In my previous life, he didn't necessarily betray Ilias, but had chosen to leave court life and stay in the countryside, staying away from court drama. The sheer shock of the setting, the disreputable sailor's inn of yesterday replaced by the highest elegance of the capital today, made me stop, a flush of heat rising up my neck. Ilias rose, smoothly pulling out 2 additional chairs to accommodate us all, a gesture of effortless, commanding grace. His smile was dazzling, free of the mask, yet somehow more dangerous than it had been in the dim light of the tavern. "Lady Aspen," he greeted, his voice resonating with amusement. "You keep the most interesting appointments. Please, join us. I believe my brother and I have accidentally commandeered your table," he said with grace, knowing full well the table was his to begin with. Ilias's younger brother, Prince Valerias, scrambled to his feet, flushed crimson at the sudden invasion of 4 stunning, well-dressed women. He offered a clumsy bow. My ladies," Valerias stammered, looking instantly overwhelmed. "I was unaware. This is unexpected good fortune." Astoria, ever the diplomat, recovered first, curtsying deeply. Astrid and Asa followed suit. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was not a business meeting. This was a public declaration. "Your Highnesses," I said with a deep bow, introducing my sisters with a sweep of my hand, "may I present Astoria, Astrid, and Asa Ashley. Sisters, this is Prince Ilias." Ilias nodded to my sisters and said, "Ladies, this is my young brother Valerias," his purple eyes never leaving mine. "Indeed. Please be seated. Valerias, perhaps you can distract the ladies with the menu and offer some recommendations. Aspen and I have a great many business arrangements to discuss." The word business was delivered with a cynical, seductive curl of his lip that caused Astrid to immediately drop her shawl. Valerias, flustered but obedient, began detailing the various types of tea to my sisters, whose eyes were wide with wonder, taking his every word. I sank into the chair Ilias held for me, feeling the sudden intense focus of the entire room. "A season of invitations," I murmured, leaning slightly towards him, keeping my voice low. "That was quite the grand gesture, Your Highness. Completely unnecessary." Ilias settled back, an amused predator surveying his prey. I do not do things by half measures, Aspen. You need a platform to secure your dominance, and I needed an entertaining distraction from the tedious courtiers. Now, every single person who matters knows you are under my protection, or at least, within my orbit. I guess I should thank you, I countered, a wry smile touching my lips. You did secure me a substantial shopping budget this morning too, you realise. He chuckled, a low, captivating sound. Ilias doesn't just pay for things. I create new revenue streams. Consider it my first installment on the leaden profit. Now you can acquire the proper armour for our little war. War? I thought this was a joint investment venture. It is, he corrected, leaning in slightly, bringing the clean air of sandalwood and expensive cologne with him. The contrast with the cheap spirits of the afternoon before was staggering. But your future requires tearing down the foundation of your first one. That is war. Tell me, Aspen, how's our venture going? Is my gold safe with Dandridge? Ilias, I said, shaking my head with mock despair. You think me incompetent? Timothy Dandridge is currently steaming towards the Southern Isles, funded and equipped. He has already gone. The sincerity in his eyes deepened, a flicker of genuine respect cutting through the aristocratic mask. Good. Speed is everything. And I have taken the liberty of purchasing 2 small warehouses at the southern dockyards, under an assumed name. Once Dandridge returns, we will have secured storage, ready for the market. The sheer audacity and efficiency of his operation left me breathless. He had moved on my words from the tavern, my desperate plans, with the speed and precision of a military commander. You seem to trust me implicitly in this venture, I noted, a slight tremor in my voice. You gave a significant fortune to a desperate sailor and a woman you knew for only a few hours. I trust your desperation, he countered, his purple eyes burning into mine, and I trust that desperation can yield at times favourable results. You know what they say about cornered animals and how dangerous they are. I have done my part. You must do yours. Survive the court. The conversation had turned low and intense, cutting through the pleasant clamour of the cafe. I felt the familiar pull of attraction, the undeniable chemistry that had existed between us on the balcony and in the tavern yesterday. It was dangerous, thrilling, and bordered on indecent in this public place. Ilias leaned towards me, his handsome face mere inches from mine. His voice dropped to a barely audible rasp that seemed to bypass my ear entirely and vibrate directly in my chest and shoot straight to my core. I hope, Aspen, he whispered, his eyes locking on my mouth, that you and I will become allies. I need someone I can trust in court, unburdened by former ties. You are exactly what I need. The way he said the last words sounded carnal. I shivered, unable to pull away. The words felt almost like a kiss. I will want you to tell me, he pressed, his breath warm against my ear, his voice lower still. Tell me who is my true friend and who isn't. It was too much. The intensity was palpable. The air around our small corner of the table had thickened with raw, forbidden energy. Other diners were starting to stare, not at the Ashley sisters, but at the 2 of us, locked in this scandalous proximity. The silence between us, charged with the past and the future, felt utterly damning. My senses heightened. I wanted this man. I wanted to feel him feel me. His prowess is not something that ladies keep a secret. I'm curious to know and taste him, drawn inexplicably like a moth to a flame. I looked at his full lips, just a taste, a little one. He seemed to read my mind, and he was about to claim my mouth. Clink. Astoria, with a gasp of feigned clumsiness, had deliberately dropped her silver teaspoon onto the marble floor. Oh, my heavens, she exclaimed, instantly breaking the eye contact, and the almost scandalous act that almost happened. I am so terribly clumsy. Valerias, Your Highness, would you be a dear? The moment was shattered. I inhaled sharply, pulling back and composing my face. Ilias turned, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face as he met Astoria's challenging, protective stare. Astoria, her eyes throwing daggers, was shrewd. She had seen the danger of the intimacy and broken it with perfect courtly skill. A masterful move, Lady Astoria, Ilias commented, loud enough for the table to hear, but his eyes were still on me. Your sisters are fiercely loyal, Aspen. That is a rare commodity at court. You will need it. He stood up, graceful and sudden, signalling the end of the audience. Valerius, we have business to attend to. Aspen, ladies, enjoy your tea and lovely cakes. I expect to see you at the first garden party. Valerius, visibly relieved to be leaving, bowed hastily to all of us. Ilias merely inclined his head toward me, his purple eyes promising a swift, dangerous reunion. Then the Dark Prince and his younger brother swept out of the Contessa's crumb, leaving a vacuum of energy behind them. The noise level in the cafe instantly rose as every noble in the room turned to stare unabashedly at our table. The whispers were no longer just about the invitation. They were about the undeniable, explosive chemistry they had just witnessed between the notoriously scandalous Prince Ilias and the upstart Baron's daughter. Astoria leaned over, picking up her spoon. Her voice was low and stern. Aspen, you were very indiscreet. That was highly provocative. Do you know what kind of ruinous gossip that will start? The way he was looking at you, it was practically a proposal of an illicit affair. 3 mothers. Her voice was low only for me to hear. It was not a proposal, Astoria, I said, feeling my cheeks flush but smiling widely. I was alive. For the first time in my 2 lives, I felt alive. Ilias loves to play games, and unfortunately, I feel like our family are his newest interest. Astrid, however, looked dreamy. Oh, but he is breathtaking. And the way he leans in, as if the secrets he is sharing are the most important in the world. Asa reached across the table, pinching my arm. He almost kissed her. He almost kissed you. Oh, that would have set the tongues wagging the whole season, I guarantee it, she said, her voice very low but eyes wide with excitement. I simply smiled, picking up my napkin. I looked out the window, past the line of nobles toward the direction Ilias had gone. The risk was monumental. I was partnered with a man whose future was a noose and a king whose brother would soon betray him, but the feeling of control, the sheer exhilaration of playing a game with such impossibly high stakes, made every past fear worth it. The old Aspen was dead. This new Aspen was ready to play for the crown. Spent the next hour consuming a variety of exquisite pastries, from the delicate gâteau du soleil to the rich chocolate indulgence. This leaden spice you spoke of, Astoria mused, sampling a lemon tart with professional detachment. I think I can taste a hint of it here. I picked up the pastry she was eating. It is Astoria, I assured her. Its complexity is unmatched. Astrid immediately launched into an enthusiastic description of a gown, which helped mask the lingering tension and the sudden intense interest we were receiving from every noble patron in the Contessa's crumb. I knew without a doubt that by sunset the entire capital would be buzzing, not about the mask ball, but about the Dark Prince's scandalous morning meeting with the Ashley daughters. The first move in the political game was complete. Ilias had given me the stage, and now I had the funding. All that remained was to ensure neither of us died before the profits arrived. Chapter 6. The Price of a Censor's Vote. The residual scent of vanilla, and the glorious sense of triumph I had carried back from the Contessa's crumb, evaporated into thin air by late afternoon. I had thought the public display of favour from Prince Ilias was something that will fade into nothing. I was wrong. The power of gossip in the capital, I quickly learned, was immediate, terrifying, and amplified tenfold by the proximity of royalty. This is something I foolishly had forgotten. My father, Baron Stannis Ashley, did not return home in the calm, measured gait of a financier who had navigated a successful day. He arrived with the explosive force of a man who had seen his entire life's work annihilated by a whispered jest. He slammed the heavy oak front door of Ashley Manor shut with such force that the ancestral portraits in the hallway visibly trembled. My family, Rona, Carly, Astoria, Astrid, and Asa, was gathered in the main drawing room, absorbed in a high-stakes discussion about a new dye imported from the Free Cities, which supposedly made green fabric shimmer like liquid moss. The sight of father, however, stopped the conversation mid-sentence. His usually impeccable coat was rumpled, and his face had turned a shocking, furious shade of purple that, ironically, matched Ilias's eyes. Aspen! His roar was volcanic, shaking the chandeliers. It was the sound of a man who saw his careful decades-long construction of respectability collapsing under the weight of frivolous gossip. I rose slowly from my chair, setting aside the new account ledger where I had been logging Timothy Dandridge's initial expenses. I met his furious gaze without flinching. Father was quite dramatic, but his noise was usually more bark than bite. "Father," I replied, keeping my voice steady and low. "Don't you father me. What in the three mothers' name have you done now? The whispers, the absolute filth I heard at the exchange today. I was called away from a crucial negotiation by Lord Harford, who asked me if my daughter had decided to take up residence on the streets. On the streets, Aspen, and with a prince of the blood no less, that scoundrel Ilias." He paced the length of the room, his fists clenched tight enough to split his knuckles. "Do you know what they are saying? They are saying you and Ilias, the Dark Prince, the scandal of the throne, the man whose every move is a subject of ridicule and vicious rumours. They say you were tongue-kissing in the middle of the Contessa's crumb. They say you were almost tearing each other's clothes off right there in the bay window. Is this what my years of tireless work securing this family's reputation leads to? A public spectacle of wanton depravity?" Rona clapped a hand over her mouth, her face pale with true alarm. Astrid burst into tears, the romantic vision of the charming rake ruined by the brutal reality of court gossip. Carly simply shook her head. Both their eyes turned to look at me. I remained silent, allowing his storm to rage, knowing that any defence I offered now would only fuel his fire. "That man," Father spat, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "I told you. No, I forbade you to encourage his attention. I specifically told you he was a passing acquaintance, and less than 24 hours later, you are his public mistress. Ricard, even with all his faults, never drew this kind of ruinous attention. The invitations, the gown budget, it's all meaningless if we are treated like common tarts in the gutter press." He finished his rant, his chest heaving, his powerful frame slumped in exhaustion and fury. The room was silent once more, waiting for the fallout. It was Astoria, my older sister, who broke the silence. She stepped forward with the calm, measured grace of a seasoned diplomat. Astoria was not sentimental, but she was fair, and she possessed the keenest, most unimpeachable sense of propriety in our household. "Father," Astoria began, her voice soft but resonating with absolute conviction. "Nothing of that nature occurred. I was there. Astrid, Asa, and I were all present for the entirety of the interaction as you commanded." Father's frantic, glazed eyes found her. "You were there? Good. Tell me the truth, Astoria. Did Ilias behave inappropriately?" "No, Father," Astoria said firmly. "He behaved with the impeccable, if somewhat theatrical courtesy of a prince paying a compliment to a lady. He secured us an excellent table, introduced us to his brother, and engaged Aspen in a low, intense conversation regarding, as he termed it, business arrangements. There was no touching beyond a shared glance, no raised voices, and certainly no indecency of any sort." She lied on the last part. Astoria took a small breath, her green eyes clear and unwavering. "The gossip has been magnified 100-fold, Father. They were seated prominently, and they appeared to be having a private discussion. That is all. He did not chase her, he did not press her, and definitely no tongue-kissing occurred. It was a calculated public declaration of interest, if anything, and frankly, a massive social elevation for us. We were let into the Contessa's crumb ahead of people with more wealth and social clout than we have. The rumour is a result of jealousy, not fact." Astrid and Asa nodded vigorously, agreeing with Astoria's words and half-truths. Father listened, his breathing slowing, the truth of Astoria's character slowly sinking in. Astoria was the barometer of our family's respectability. Her word was gold. His chest slowly deflated, and the purple colour faded from his face, replaced by shame. He ran a hand through his thinning dark blonde hair. "By the three mothers, I am an idiot. I should not have let the false rumours wind me up. I should have remembered you were with her, Astoria. You are the most sensible person in this household, my dear. You have proven yourself yet again." He sighed deeply, the shame in his voice palpable. "To think I believed those scurrilous wretches over my own daughter. Forgive me, Aspen." The shame quickly twisted into external indignation. "This cannot stand," he declared, his voice hard with renewed purpose. "This is defamation. I will find out who started this malicious falsehood. which newspaper, which gossip sheet, which courtier, and I will sue them. I will tear their reputation to shreds. I will make an example of them in the High Court. Stannis, no, Carly interjected gently, finally putting down her quill and walking to him. She placed a calming hand on his arm. Don't you see? That is precisely what they want, to make us look provincial, thin-skinned, and desperate. We have the invitations to the garden parties, that is our triumph. A lawsuit only extends the story, cementing the association in the public mind. A prince of the blood is already involved. Do you really want to force the court to make judgment over the issue of a baron's daughter and Prince Ilias over the matter of a tongue kiss? Father looked at the floor, grinding his teeth. Carly's pragmatism was always his anchor. The truth of her words was inescapable. A public battle would only solidify the very rumours he sought to dispel. You are right, Carly, he muttered, defeated. We must ignore it. Ignore the insult. Ignore the scandal. We will simply show up to the garden party impeccably dressed and behave with such flawless dignity and manners that the rumours are choked by the truth. Carly smiled. Precisely. And on that note, I have an update that will soothe your mind and fill you with pride. I spent the morning tracking down that seamstress I told you about, Madame Elara. She is a newcomer, specializing in perfect cut and quick delivery. I sent her all the measurements from yesterday. She has promised that 5 sets of stunning day gowns and 2 complete sets of evening gowns will be delivered tomorrow afternoon, ready for the first garden party on Saturday. Rona instantly brightened. Elara? I heard she did the Duchess of Aldridge's wedding gown. This is brilliant, Carly. The drama subsided, replaced by the familiar, comforting hum of domestic strategy. Father visibly relaxed, the pressure easing from his shoulders. He turned his attention back to Astoria, the most reliable of his children. Astoria, speaking of dignity and reputation, he said, his tone softening to parental concern. How was your ride with Count Lukov? Did he finally make his intentions clear? Did he seem suitably impressed by your discretion at the mask? Astoria gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. It was pleasant, Father. He spoke at length about the new racing season and his prize stallion, Tempest. He seemed more focused on his horse's pedigree than mine, I fear. He is perfectly respectable, but utterly tedious. Father frowned, disappointed. Tedious but solvent, dear, we cannot be too picky. We need stability, not excitement. He then checked his pocket watch. Now I have one final piece of business to attend to before the evening. Listen closely, all of you. He looked around the room, his expression grave. I have secured a vote on the census department. The vote is tomorrow and the margin is razor thin. To secure this position, I need the influence and goodwill of Duke Rinder. A visible ripple of dismay went through me. I have not made it a secret my disdain for Ricard's family. To that end, Father announced, I have arranged a dinner here tomorrow evening. Duke Rinder, his 3 wives, and his son Ricard will be joining us. A cold dread clenched my stomach. The future king's chief advisor, the architect of my future misery. His presence here, his insidious pursuit, felt like the first tick of the execution clock. Father, I cut in, speaking for the first time since the rant, my voice sharp, reminding him of our earlier conversation. I must remind you that I will not have Ricard. We agreed on this. Father waved his hand dismissively. This has nothing to do with you, Aspen, or your marriage prospects, or any ridiculous courtship rituals. This is about power. I know you dislike him, but this is a political dinner. The census department position is a matter of immense importance. It controls the flow of information and permits a perfect perch for me to establish long-term political influence, far outweighing a baron's title. I need Rinder's vote, and I need him to think that eventually I will be putty in his hand, ready to do his bidding. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Just one evening, Aspen. Be charming, be polite, but above all, be inaccessible. Let Ricard pine, that's his business. Let the Duke think he has leverage. Just one night, dearest. I just need him to keep that vote locked down until the department seats me. I understand, Father, I conceded, the weight of the new requirement settling heavily on my shoulders. I will play the perfect daughter for the census department. The rest of the evening was spent with my two mothers dictating the menu, the seating chart, and the required conversational topics for the next day. The tension in the house shifted from the gossip of the Dark Prince to the impending, dreaded visit from the Rinder family. 2. The day of the dinner. The following day passed in a whirlwind of meticulous preparation. The Ashley staff, spurred on by Rona's military precision, moved through the house with frantic, silent efficiency. Silver was polished, floors were waxed, and the air was thick with the scent of lilies and beeswax. In the early afternoon, the gowns arrived. Carly had not exaggerated. Madame Elara's creations were breathtaking. My day gown for the first garden party, a stunning blue-green silk that shimmered like deep water, was perfect. My evening gown was a severe yet undeniably elegant emerald velvet that would make me stand out with a daringly low décolletage. They are masterpieces, Astoria admitted, inspecting the internal seams of her own pale gold dress. Mother, you have secured a miracle. It is not a miracle, Carly said, adjusting a piece of lace on Astrid's sleeve. It is good commerce. Elara is eager for patronage. Now remember tonight, we are courteous, intelligent, and above all, we are not desperate. Aspen, be polite, and remember to keep your feelings for Ricard off your face. The hours crawled by. I felt the familiar cold anxiety of my past life creeping into my veins. Ricard was not just a tedious suitor. He was the future king's chief advisor, the man who had signed the documents that confiscated our wealth and imprisoned our family behind my back. His presence here, his insidious pursuit, felt like the first tick of the execution clock. I didn't fear him. I had Ilias's influence and the leaden venture as an escape route, but I hated the necessary charade of deference to this entitled insect. At precisely 7 o'clock, a luxurious, long black family carriage arrived at the residence. Duke Rinder was an enormous, imposing man with a booming voice and a laugh like shattering glass. He was accompanied by his 3 wives, 2 silent, nervous women, and the third, the Duchess Alessa, a brittle, hawk-nosed woman who looked down her nose at everything in the Ashley house. Ricard, the son, was a pale imitation of his father, physically in shape, his golden beauty all from his mother Duchess Alessa. The dinner itself was a stiff, orchestrated success. Father played the role of the affable host to perfection, focusing the conversation on infrastructure, trade permits, and, most importantly, the upcoming Census Department vote. Duke Rinder, puffing his chest out, talked relentlessly about the king, his own ancient lineage, and the deficiencies of all the other barons who were vying for the position father sought. I performed flawlessly. I was intelligent when addressed, witty but deferential, and always managed to include a glance or a comment that engaged Ricard without encouraging him. I spoke only when required and kept my distance. The perfect, frustrating target. The food was exquisite, the wine flowed, and by the time the finger bowls were brought out, Father had Duke Rinder roaring with laughter over a mildly off-colour political joke. Father's plan was working. The Duke was being charmed, placated, and was subtly hinting that his considerable block of votes would swing Father's way. You, Ashley, Rinder roared, slapping the table. You are a man with a backbone. Unlike some of these whimpering noblemen, you deserve that position. A strong hand is needed in the Census Department. A strong hand. He looked pointedly at Ricard. Ricard, who had been studying me with a proprietary smouldering look all night, simply nodded with his usual bored confidence. Finally, the dinner concluded, and the ladies retired to the drawing-room while the men remained briefly to finish their brandy, a ritual dictated by tradition. However, the men quickly joined us, as Duke Rinder clearly had no interest in continuing the political pleasantries now that the food was done. A splendid dinner, Baron, Rinder declared, walking into the drawing-room where the Ashley women and Rinder's wives were seated. Truly superb. But now, down to business. Father's face instantly tightened. Business, Duke? He asked, perplexed. He thought the political discussion was concluded for the evening. Ricard stepped forward. He was dressed in a dark blue coat, and his pale hair was slicked back, giving him a false air of maturity. He looked at me, and a slow, entitled smile spread across his face. Then, in a move that was so shockingly improper that the collective intake of breath from the Ashley women sounded like a hurricane, Rickard Rinder dropped to one knee. He did it directly in front of me, in the middle of the drawing room, in front of both families. Duke Rinder, his 3 wives, father, Rona, Carly, Astoria, Astrid, and Asa. It was an engagement proposal, a declaration of intent, and a strategic ambush, all rolled into one. It was something that was never done without the explicit, prior approval of the parents, the signing of financial agreements, and the careful scheduling of a formal private meeting. To propose publicly, in front of guests, was a calculated act of aggression designed to trap the woman and her father through social pressure. Father, the political animal, was utterly blindsided. He had always taken Rickard to be a conventional, well-mannered young man. His face went instantly white with fury, but he was completely paralyzed. His body was tense, but his features remained carefully neutral. The censors department, he reminded himself frantically. The censors department. He could not afford to insult the Duke's son now. Rickard, oblivious to the silence he had created, pulled a small, heavy velvet box from his waistcoat. He opened it to reveal a large, gaudy diamond ring. "Lady Aspen," Rickard announced, his voice ringing with smug confidence. "You are a spirited, ethereal woman. I admire your ambition and your ability to stand out, and you will make a magnificent first Duchess. I ask you now, in the presence of our families, will you accept my hand in marriage and become the future Duchess Rinder?" The silence that followed was so profound, it felt as if the air itself had been sucked from the room. I looked at the ring, then at Rickard's confident, victorious face, and finally at my father, whose eyes silently screamed, "Please, just stall, don't ruin this." The memory of the cold, suffocating prison cell, the public execution, and the sound of Rickard's dismissive laughter over my failure flooded my senses. The fear was gone, replaced by a pure, diamond-hard resolve. I would rather be Ilias's co-conspirator in a dungeon than this man's wife in a palace. "Rickard," I began, my voice clear and carrying, already forming the perfect, diplomatic refusal that would save my father's vote while crushing Rickard's ego. "Your offer is profoundly flattering, but in light of—" Before I could finish, Rona sprang into action, moving with the speed and dexterity of a seasoned performer. She rushed forward not toward me, but toward Rickard. "Oh, your lordship, what a wonderfully dramatic flourish!" Rona exclaimed, forcing a bright, utterly false smile onto her face. She took his arm and gently, firmly lifted him to his feet before he could hear my refusal. "But my dear boy," Rona continued, her voice light and musical, distracting the entire room, "this is the Baron's house, and in Tangorian tradition such a profound request requires the necessary formalities. To accept or refuse in this manner would cause terrible scandal, wagging tongues would have a field day, and it would damage your magnificent reputation. Please stand. You must allow the Baron and the Duke to retire and discuss the formalities of the dowry and settlement first." It was a brilliant manoeuvre. It acknowledged the proposal while forcing him to retreat behind the cover of protocol, saving me the need for a final, catastrophic refusal. Duke Rinder, however, was not one to be outmanoeuvred by a mere baroness. He saw Rona's move for the clever stall it was. He planted his heavy frame in the middle of the room, fixing his arrogant, booming gaze on Rona, then on me. "Scandal? Protocol?" Duke Rinder scoffed, his voice dripping with contempt. "We can dispense with such niceties, Baroness. Your daughter has already made a mockery of protocol. She has already attracted the most ruinous gossip in the entire capital. The wagging tongues are already claiming she is the whore of the Dark Prince. Protocol indeed. She should be flattered that my son, the future Duke, is even considering her as his first wife, or any wife at all. The Ashley name is respectable, yes, but it is far below the ducal house of Rinder." He turned his monstrous gaze onto father, who was still standing rigid, clenching and unclenching his fists. "You, Baron Ashley," Rinder continued, leaning in with menace, "you should be grovelling in gratitude. My son is besotted, and that is your opportunity. You want the censors department position, do you not? You want influence, power, and the ability to dictate policy, not just obey it. Then you will instruct your daughter to accept this proposal immediately, Or you can forget about your position in the census department, and you can forget about any future influence in this court. Do the right thing, Baron. Accept the inevitable. Huh? The silence that followed this declaration was hot, volatile, and thick with the odour of raw insult and blatant threats. Duke Rinder had not just threatened Father's political career. He had publicly insulted his wives, his daughter, and our lineage in our own home. He had attempted to force a marriage through blackmail. Father, the cautious, calculating minor lord, lived his entire life by the logic of trade. He understood risk, profit, and the long-term value of political positions. The census department was an extraordinary prize. He had worked for months, spending a fortune in favours and bribes for this single vote. He knew that if he lost Rinder, he lost the position. But in that moment, looking at the brute who dared to speak to us as if we were livestock, the ambitious caution evaporated. The father, the patriarch, took over. Father's face, already pale from the earlier scandal, flushed a deep, terrifying crimson. The mask of the calculating baron cracked, revealing a pure, elemental rage. Not the polished baron of Tangoria, but the man who grew up in desolate, rough conditions and a constant survival mode. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his voice low, dangerously quiet. "Duke," Father said, his voice barely a breath, forcing everyone in the room to lean in to hear him. "In my life, I have been spat on and jeered, insulted by drunken sailors, cheated by rival merchants, and undermined by envious peers. I have accepted it all as the cost of doing business, of being a man. But I will not allow you, or any man, to insult my daughters in my own home." Father took another step, now towering over the slightly shorter, wider Duke. "My daughters are the finest women in this capital. They are beautiful, intelligent, and their honour is spotless. If a low-born gossip finds it necessary to slander them, I ignore it. But when a so-called duke," Father said, poking Rinder in the chest, "uses that same slander to blackmail me and force a marriage for his weak-willed son, I draw a line." Father strangely and frighteningly didn't raise his voice, but somehow it was louder and more terrible than before. More chilling. "Duke Rinder, you can take your census department, your threat, your ill-mannered son, your ancient decaying lineage, your sour-faced wives, and you can go to hell." Father pointed a shaking, furious finger at the door. "You are no longer welcome in this house. Get out! Get your wives, get your son, and get out of Ashley Manor. Now, I can't believe I used my good wine on you." The Duke was momentarily stunned into silence, his face contorted in disbelief that a mere baron would defease him and throw away a lifetime of political ambition. Rickard, stunned that someone could stand up to his powerful father, looked like he was about to faint from the sheer public humiliation. "You insolent nobody," Rinder finally managed to bellow. "You dare defy me? You will be ruined. You will be a laughingstock. You will be destitute." "I will be ruined with my honour intact," Father retorted, his voice vibrating with righteous fury. "Now, leave, or I will have my footmen drag your considerable, hefty body into the street." The threat was real. Duke Rinder, spluttering and red-faced, finally snatched up his coat, barked a sharp command at his wives, and stormed toward the door. Rickard threw one last hurt, thwarted glance at me, the source of his profound embarrassment, and followed his father in a panicked rush. The sound of the front door slamming for the second time in as many days echoed through the house, louder and more final than any court decree. The new game. My family stood in the silent drawing room, stunned by the audacity of the ambush and the ferocious dignity of Father's response. Rona was the first to move, walking to Father and taking his hands, tears welling in her eyes. "Stannis," she whispered, her voice filled with pride, "you chose us. You chose your daughters over the position." He looked at her, his anger slowly receding, leaving him shaky and exhausted. "He insulted my blood, Rona. The position meant nothing if I had to sell one of you to an imbecile who thought he could use me." He then looked at me. "I am sorry, Aspen. I should have trusted you, and I thought I needed that position." I rushed to him, embracing him fiercely. "You did the right thing, Father, the truly right thing. Thank you." Astoria and Astrid were wide-eyed but thrilled. Asa was openly beaming, a look of profound respect for her father shining in her eyes. The house had just lost its greatest political opportunity, but it had regained its honour. "Well," Carly said briskly, walking to the discarded ring box on the floor and picking up the glittering diamond. "He did leave the ring. We will have one of the servants take it to the Duke's residence in the morning." She placed it on a side table with a practical clink. "Now we have a garden party to attend on Saturday. Stannis, you need a very strong brandy, and then you need to tell me precisely who will be voting for you, because now we have a scandal that even Ilias's presence cannot overcome. We will need new friends, and quickly." Father, despite the devastation of his lost ambition, felt an enormous wave of relief. He had made the right choice. He looked down at me, my arms still around his waist, and kissed my forehead, realizing that his attempt to secure stability through convention had failed. Chapter 7. The Ultimate Betrayal. The Weight of the Censor's Revenge. The silence that blanketed Ashley Manor, the morning after Father's great display of fury and honour, was far heavier than the rage that had preceded it. We should have been celebrating our dignity, but the air felt thin and pregnant with unspoken disaster. Carly was already organising the return of Ricard's enormous vulgar ring, a gesture of finality that felt less triumphant and more like securing a financial marker before total ruin. I found Father in his office before breakfast, a room usually buzzing with the crisp efficiency of ledgers, bills of lading, and clerks running errands. This morning, however, the room was dimly lit, and only Stannis sat behind the large mahogany desk, his powerful frame slumped in a way I had never seen. He wasn't working. He was simply staring, his gaze fixed on a thick, official-looking document resting on the polished wood. His dark blonde hair, usually carefully coiffed, was slightly messy. He didn't look up when I quietly entered. "Father," I said, moving cautiously toward the desk, "are you all right? You look as though you haven't slept a wink." He flinched, startled, as if my presence had pulled him from deep, cold water. He quickly snatched the document from the desk, crumpling the edge as he shoved it beneath a heavy bronze inkwell. "Aspen," he replied, his voice rough and dismissive, echoing his tone from before Astoria's intervention. "Why are you here? Go and fuss over your new gowns, child. Today is the garden party. We must maintain a flawless image." I leaned against the desk, resting my palms flat against the cold, smooth wood. "Don't treat me like a child, Father. Not after last night. You defended our family's honour at the cost of your greatest ambition. I saw the price you paid, and I know you're not all right. Tell me, is it Duke Rinder who has you in this state?" He sighed, running a hand over his face, a gesture of profound weariness. "Nothing. He did nothing. Go, Aspen. I have inventory to check." "I won't leave," I insisted, softening my voice. "I was the reason. If he has escalated this, I need to know. I'm not asking for the family's sake, I'm asking for mine. I won't sit prettily in a silk gown today wondering if the roof is about to fall on my head." The quiet intensity in my voice must have broken his resolve. He looked up at me, his eyes tired and haunted, and the carefully constructed mask of the formidable Baron finally fell away. "He is a brute, Aspen," Father whispered, the volume of his voice more devastating than the roar of the night before. "An absolute, petty, vindictive brute." He reached slowly for the document and reluctantly pulled it out, smoothing the creases and sliding it across the desk toward me. "It arrived an hour ago, delivered by a messenger with the seal of the Ministry of Commerce. It is signed by the minister himself, a man who owes Rinder enormous favours, it seems." I picked up the document, the heavy parchment feeling instantly cold in my hand. I scanned the official script, my mind trying to make sense of the dense legal jargon. Temporarily suspended, for 30 standard days. Failure to perform duties. Pending full review of operational permits and compliance certifications, I read aloud, my voice dropping to a horrified whisper. A comprehensive review of all my work, effective immediately. I looked up, my vision blurring. "Father, what does this mean? Temporarily suspended? For 30 days? "It means," he said flatly, leaning back in his chair, "that I am cut out of my work at the ministry. It's a terrible mark on my record. My work there, which has been close to perfection, suddenly needs review, 30 days away from the ministry." "But 30 days?" I stammered, still grasping for stability. 30 days of inactivity won't mean much, will they? They won't find anything." 30 days is just the start, Aspen. It's Rinder's way of showing me he can keep the knot tied forever. He intends for the review to find constant, complicated bureaucratic failures, which I assure you they will, as it is not hard to find fault in someone's work no matter how meticulous they are. And he will extend the suspension 30 days at a time until I am strangled out. The message is clear. You marry Rickard, or I'm completely finished in Tangoria before the year is out. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just political manoeuvring. This was total economic war. Rinder wasn't going to duel father. He was going to hound us out of Tangoria. I looked at the document, the dense legal text suddenly feeling like a death warrant. We had faced scandal before, but never this. This struck at the very foundation of our existence, the wealth that bought us our respectability and our gowns. The others, I said, looking toward the door. Rona, Carly, Astoria. They can't know. Father nodded grimly. Exactly. If I tell Rona, she will panic and start selling jewels. If I tell Carly, she will begin desperately seeking a way to bribe Rinder. Astoria would insist on visiting Count Lukov immediately, which would be a colossal mistake, as it would reveal our desperation. We need to look untouched, unflappable, and impossibly wealthy today. We need to be the picture of dignity that chokes the rumours. Promise me, Aspen. Until I can find an emergency legal counsel, this stays between us. We cannot ruin the morale of the family with a threat. We cannot yet fight legally. I promise, Father, I said, folding the paper carefully and handing it back to him. Your secret is safe with me. But we both know that dignity won't keep our head up for long in Tangoria. And it certainly won't stop Rinder. He locked the letter away in his safe, the click of the tumbler sounding like a grave closing. We must find another way, Aspen. But today, we smile, we charm, and we pretend we have not a care in the world. The labyrinth of flowers and lies. The first of the royal garden parties was always a spectacular affair. It was held on the king's private grounds, a sprawling estate that blended manicured formality with the wild, ancient forests of Tangoria. Our arrival was flawless. Carly's selection had been an inspired choice. We stepped out of our luxurious carriage. Our clothes were perfect, down to the finest stitch. Mine was cut perfectly, drawing a precise line between the proper and the alluring. The rest of the family were a vision of composure. Father, dressed in his finest velvet, wore a smile of such effortless confidence that he looked like a man who had just brokered a peace treaty, not one who had received a suspension notice. Rona was stately, Carly was keen, and my sisters were flawless examples of sophisticated beauty. As soon as we were through the main gates and into the throng, Ilias's philosophy echoed in my ears. Bet everything, Aspen, everything, if you want freedom. Freedom now had a very specific definition: economic solvency. Freedom was saving Father's career. Freedom was ensuring the census department, whether Father got the seat or not, never had the power to strangle us again. Rinder had given us an ultimatum, and now I understood that I was the key to both our ruin and our salvation. The initial hours of the party were a blur of polite society. We moved with the grace of seasoned politicians, engaging in conversations that were meaningless, but critical for maintaining face. I saw Rickard and his father early on. Rickard, still smarting from the previous night's public refusal, kept his distance, looking sullen and possessive from across the lawn. It was Duke Rinder who made the first move. He cornered Father near a large, ornate fountain, while I was ostensibly chatting with Astoria and a minor lord about the excellent gardens and designs of some hedge bushes. I watched them, my heart beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Father's composure was impressive, but Rinder's bulk and aggressive posture were dominating the conversation. The Duke leaned close, his voice too low for me to catch the exact words, but I saw the cruel smile, the proprietary glances he flicked toward me, and the distinct calculating nod of his head. Then Rinder pulled something from his pocket, a rolled piece of paper, thick and official. He tapped lightly against his palm as he spoke, his eyes never leaving Father's face. Father's expression remained serene, yet his shoulders were rigid with suppressed rage. The exchange concluded quickly. Father offered a slight dismissive shrug, and Rinder gave a triumphant, cold laugh before moving away with Rickard in tow. I abandoned my conversation and rushed to father, catching his arm. What did he say? Was that about the suspension? Father gave a non-committal hum and straightened his coat. He merely confirmed the suspension, Aspen, and he elaborated on the terms. The review, he assured me, will not be a quick audit. It will be a continuous, thorough, and highly inventive inquiry into every commercial relationship I have established in the last 2 decades. He is going to bankrupt us slowly as well, it seems, I whispered, tasting ash in my mouth. Precisely. He has no intention of allowing me to appeal or challenge the suspension. He intends to starve my businesses until I am crawling to him, begging him to accept your hand in exchange for the Ministry of Commerce withdrawing its investigation. He made it quite clear. I marry you off to Ricard, or Ashley goes under. And what was your answer? Father's eyes held a fierce, weary pride. I told him that I had already given him his answer and that his pettiness was utterly predictable. My answer still stands. We were standing in a field of daisies, surrounded by the crème de la crème of Tangorian society, yet I felt as exposed and vulnerable as if we were chained in the stocks. We were out of options. The conventional path had closed. The honourable path led to the execution block. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the society chatter wash over me. I needed to think outside of my father's world of commerce and permits. I needed a political detonation. I remembered a small detail from the historical papers I had studied in my previous life, an obscure, almost forgotten item of court gossip that had occurred shortly before the king's first grave illness. The sponile flowers. They bloomed only once every 7 years, a massive rare display of bioluminescent white blossoms that opened fully in the twilight of the second day of the garden party. It was a massive event of religious and political significance. The king, the queens, the princes, the entire court would gather at dusk tomorrow to witness the spectacle. And near the cluster of sponile flowers, I remembered, were the royal cabanas, small, curtained, temporary retreats meant for ladies who needed a rest or a private conversation. The idea hit me with the force of a tidal wave, a dizzying rush of terror and exhilaration. It was insane. It was ruinous. It was everything Ilias had preached. It was a bet on my entire existence, made in the hope of saving my family. I needed a scandal so immediate, so magnificent, and so politically dangerous that Duke Rinder's paltry economic threats would be swept away by the resulting storm. I needed a scandal that involved the crown itself, making the Ashley family either untouchable or utterly damned. I opened my eyes, scanning the crowd. I was looking for the Dark Prince. I had a deal to propose, a contract of destruction to sign. I spotted him across the lawn, standing slightly apart from a group of minor nobles who were trying and failing to engage him in conversation. Prince Ilias, dressed impeccably in black, looked like a prowling panther, aloof, dangerous, and perfectly compelling. He met my gaze, and I felt a jolt of recognition. He knew I was looking for him, and he had been somehow waiting for me. I left father with a quick squeeze of his arm and a kiss on his cheek. I walked toward Ilias, every step feeling heavier than the last, because with every step I was walking further away from the respectable baron's daughter and deeper into the abyss of the Dark Prince's game. The contract of destruction. Ilias waited for me near a hedge of purple roses, his expression unreadable, a faint, sardonic curve to his lips. Lady Aspen, he greeted, his voice low, a velvet promise and a danger rolled into one. I confess, I'm glad to see you again so soon, especially after the delightful public spectacle of the Contessa's crumb. Your family, I trust, has weathered the resulting storm. The storm has escalated, Prince, I replied, moving close enough that only he could hear me. Nothing we can't handle, I assure you. Ilias's smile widened, but there was no humour in it, only sharp, cold intelligence. Rinder has been most aggressive toward your father today. I wonder what happened. He is a brute who relies on the king's quiet approval and the suffocating power of bureaucracy. I met his gaze, my green eyes locked on his violet ones. There was no going back now. My mind was made up. I reached over and casually touched a silver button on his shirt, a finger slightly touching his half-bared chest. Let's not talk politics. Tell me, how do you plan to clear my name from the scandal you caused me yesterday? A smile curved his lips. I assure you, Aspen, with the kinds of things these people get up to, a kiss is considered modest. Ah, if the court is as debauched as you claim, then I wonder how much more sin you commit since even they clutch their pearls at your antics. I assure you, Lady Aspen, my debauchery is not something an innocent young virgin like yourself should be exposed to. Innocent? I asked gently, meeting his gaze not with the look of a 21-year-old debutante, but a woman who had lived a life, traded her body, and mastered her skills in pleasure. Ilias's nose flared and he bit his jaw. You are playing with fire, Aspen. I tilted my head slightly and bit my lip. Oh, but I do love the heat, Your Highness, I told him in a low voice as my hand moved to my low-cut neckline, which dips between my breasts to gather at an empire waistline. The fine, flowy material did not hide how my nipples perked at his proximity. He took in a sharp breath and his eyes flew to me, hunger and need in them. Oh, is that a maypole? I do love a good sturdy pole, I said as I walked away and joined the other young women by the pole. I set the bait. It's up to him to bite. I need him mindless, so that he will be willing to take me out here, going above and beyond propriety. Ilias stood perfectly still for a long moment, simply observing me, his eyes never leaving me, dark and piercing. I didn't flinch. I let him drink me in, determined. The second day, the twilight countdown. The second day of the garden party arrived, and the atmosphere was noticeably different. The air was charged with anticipation, not just for the royal attendants, but for the rare blooming of the sponile flowers. The entire court had been ordered to remain on the grounds until dusk. The Ashley family was dressed in the magnificent velvet evening gowns Carly had procured. My dress was daring, with the deep décolletage that left me feeling exposed, but it served its purpose, drawing every eye. We were, once again, the picture of flawless, new-money aristocracy, but beneath the smiles, Father and I carried the heavy truth of the suspension. The afternoon dragged. I avoided Ilias but threw glances and smiles, focusing instead on feigning interest in horticulture and poetry. I need my plan to look like a spontaneous, passionate indiscretion, not a calculated political assassination. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in fiery orange and deep violet, the crowd began migrating toward the south lawn, where the sponile flowers grew. The king and queen, along with Ilias's older brother, Prince Ilias, and the two queens, arrived in their ceremonial robes. I found Father standing alone, looking out over the magnificent procession. His shoulders were still too tense, his eyes too sharp. The air smells of desperation, Father, I commented softly, joining him. The air smells of money, Aspen, he corrected, his voice tight. The smell of money and the lack of it. Rwanda is here. He's been hovering near the king's advisers all afternoon. I saw him hand another sealed letter to the Minister of Permits. He's cutting deeper. I laid a reassuring hand on his forearm, a silent farewell. It won't matter soon. Tonight all of Rinda's letters will be invalidated by ink of a different kind. Aspen, what are you talking about? He asked, frowning deeply. Trust me, Father, just trust me. I left him moving quickly but gracefully through the gathering crowd. I found the perimeter of the Sponile Grove. The field covered in silent, tightly closed white blossoms, waiting for the final moment of twilight. And there, tucked discreetly behind a large oak, were the cabanas. Small, perfectly private tents with rich, flowing velvet curtains. I found the eyes that had been following me since yesterday and deliberately began walking towards the cabanas. I was betting on him following me. The cabana was small, secluded, and smelled faintly of roses. Next were sponiles yet to bloom. A little further was the artificial waterfall, the sound drowning out every muted sound. I sat for close to a minute when I saw his shadow as he pulled back the pink, filmy curtains. You've been avoiding me, he accused as he laid on the daybed next to me, making himself too comfortable. I looked at him, pushing a curl away from my shoulder, the movement calculated. His eyes drew to my breasts, and then he reached for the curl. What game are you playing, Aspen? I ran my finger slowly down his chest and stopped just before his crotch, which was not hiding his interest. "One you are willing to play, Your Highness?" "Oh, but you'll burn, little flower," he warned me. "I told you, I love the heat." What followed was a storm of calculated passion. I leaned into the scandal, the betrayal, the glorious, terrible wrongness of the act. I was the architect of my own ruin, and I would make it a masterpiece. Ilias was not a reserved kisser. He was dominating and insatiable. I rolled on my back and he followed me, settling between my legs and pulling one sleeve off my shoulder to expose my breast and take my nipple in his mouth. The act was erotic and made me throb and gasp, wanting him inside me. I reached down to his pants and he paused, looking me straight in my eyes, asking, "Are you sure you want to take it that far, Aspen?" My eyes, heavy-lidded with lust and lips slightly swollen, nodded. "Are you going to fuck me, Ilias, or play the perfect gentleman?" He growled and took my lips as he pushed my dress over my head, discarding it, finding me utterly naked underneath with no underwear. I knew my plan and wanted no obstacles. I tore off his jacket and shirt and pushed his pants down to free his shaft. When he entered me, there was a sharp pain. Shit, I forgot I was still a virgin. Ilias cursed, pausing, letting me get used to his thick girth. He then took my lips and slowly began to move within me gently until my discomfort turned into pure pleasure, and I threw my head back, basking in it, moaning out his name as he kissed my neck and suckled my nipples. I felt the rhythmic rumble of the crowd outside, heard the distant muffled sound of voices. "Look, Your Majesty," a voice loud and clear broke the hush. "They are spectacular. The colour is magnificent." The royal entourage was directly outside, the crowd held back by royal guards. The king's viewing stand was no more than a few feet from the cabana. The danger of it all made me nervous and I climaxed, and with the timing of a political assassin I let out a deep, satisfied groan that was loud enough to cut through the quiet reverence of the moment and the sound of flowing water. The sound was instantly followed by utter profound silence from the people. The king and his party had heard it. What was that? The king's voice, raspy and imperious, pierced the air. "That came from that tent. Guard, investigate that intrusion immediately. This is a sacred viewing. Who dares desecrate this moment?" Ilias, hearing the sound outside, looked me in the eyes, and at that moment he knew. I had lured him and set up this show. I closed my eyes, a frantic, silent prayer of thanks rising in my throat. It was done. The detonation was set off. Ilias, however, was already moving, pulling a thick satin sheet from the floor, likely for covering the furniture, and wrapping it tightly around my body, ensuring I was covered but still, undeniably, exposed. The curtains of the cabana were flung open with brutal force. Standing in the newly bright twilight, illuminated by the ghostly white glow of the sponile flowers, were 3 royal guards, Prince Ilias, the king, the 2 queens, and, directly behind them, a visibly delighted Duke Rinder, a horrified Ricard, and the full weight of the Tangorian court. The sight of Ilias, standing naked except for the sheet he had quickly wrapped around his waist, the sweat glistening on his shoulders, was enough to make half the courtmaids gasp and faint. The sight of me, naked, covered only by a haphazardly wrapped sheet, lying scandalously ravished on the daybed, was enough to make several noblemen choke on their breath. The king, a frail older man, stared in absolute horror. "Ilias," the king roared, his face turning beet red. "What is the meaning of this this depravity, in the royal cabana, during the sponile blooming?" Ilias stood tall, his chin raised in defiance, his violet eyes meeting the king's with unwavering arrogance. He looked exactly like the Dark Prince of court legend, a man without morals, a political embarrassment. But then, a terrible heartbroken sound cut through the silence. "Aspen!" I turned my head. My father, Baron Stannis Ashley, had somehow shoved his way past the guards and was standing at the forefront of the crowd. He was no longer the political merchant or the defiant patriarch. He was just a father, looking at the utterly ruined dignity of his child. I started to doubt my plan. His heartbreak was choking. His face was a mask of pure, devastating grief. He had bet his dignity to save his family, and I had just thrown that dignity into a bonfire. He saw not the political maneuver, but the final public degradation. Duke Rinder, for his part, was smiling, a slow, delighted, victorious smirk. He no longer needed an economic blockade. The Ashley name was dead. Ricard would be saved from a marriage to a ruined woman, and Rinder would be free to choose who would sit on the census department without the Baron's irritating defiance. This, I realized with a sickening jolt, was worse than the execution. My father took a single, deliberate step toward Ilias, his voice shaking with a righteous, lethal purpose that silenced even the king. "Prince Ilias," father declared, pulling off his elegant white glove, "you are a dishonorable scoundrel and a degenerate. You have violated my daughter in a manner that requires satisfaction. I challenge you, Prince of the Blood, to a duel of honor." The duel challenge was an ancient, rarely used tradition, a challenge so extreme it brought a new wave of gasps from the stunned court. Duels of honor were only for the highest, gravest offences, and they always ended in death for one of the participants. Terror seized me. Ilias was known to be the finest swordsman in the kingdom, unmatched by the king's own guard. My father, for all his physical strength, was a merchant and politician, not a warrior. "No, father," I cried out, my voice raw and desperate, the shame momentarily forgotten. "Please, no, he will kill you." Ilias's face tightened in a sudden cold anger. He looked at father, then at the king, then at me, the complex geometry of the situation locking into place. Father had just raised the stakes beyond even Ilias's wildest imagination. A prince killing a baron over a forced act of seduction would ruin Ilias's name forever, securing his political exile and ensuring his failure. I looked at Ilias, my eyes wide with naked pleading. "Don't accept. Don't ruin him. Save him. Please." Ilias caught my gaze. I saw the calculation, the furious battle in his eyes, desire to protect his political position versus his ingrained aristocratic pride, the disgust of falling into my ploy. Then, with a devastating slowness that drew out the agony for the entire silent crowd, Prince Ilias, the haughty, cynical, untouchable dark prince, the finest swordsman in Tangoria, did the most shocking thing of all. He let the sheet fall completely from his waist. He let the wind from the grove gently caress his body, ignoring his nakedness completely. He did not accept the duel. Instead, Prince Ilias took a single step toward my father and then, slowly, deliberately, he knelt. He dropped to his knees in the dirt, the raw power of his magnificent exposed body bowing completely before the furious, ruined Baron Stannis Ashley. He knelt before my father, not as a prince of the blood, but as a supplicant. "Baron Ashley," Ilias said, his voice stripped of all its cynicism, heavy with raw humility. "I cannot accept your challenge, because a duel of honor requires the consent of two men, and you speak for a man who has been dishonored by a brute, not by a prince. I do not deserve to stand before you or your daughter. I beg of you, sir, spare my life, and that of your daughter, for the grievous dishonor I have brought upon your house. I implore you for mercy, Baron. Show me the mercy the king's court has long forgotten." The king gasped. Queens covered their mouths and the court exchanged horrified, disbelieving whispers. The dark prince, kneeling naked in the grass, begging a baron for mercy. The shame, the political implication, the sheer humiliation of the possible future king. It was a spectacle far greater than any duel. Duke Rinder's victorious smirk instantly vanished, replaced by a look of bewildered, impotent fury. The scandal had not just ruined the Ashley name, it had somehow implicated the royal family in a bizarre public act of subjugation, making the Baron look like the moral victor. My father stood frozen, his arm still extended, the discarded white glove lying uselessly on the ground, staring down at the kneeling prince. The political game had taken a turn so shocking, so unexpected, that no one, least of all me, knew what to do next. My heart hammered against my ribs, and the satin sheet around me felt like a winding shroud. I was ruined, but my family, somehow, was saved. Sex is what had imprisoned me in my past life, made me a slave, but now it was a tool I chose to wield on my own.